Hello friends, and welcome to 100 days of rescuing horses in a fantasy world. If you love unicorns, Pegasi, pixies, hippocampus, and of course dragons, then I promise you will love this video. In this magical world, horses are not mere horses, but rather mystical beings, and they need my help. Many are in danger, some close to death, and it's my job to find and save them all, while also trying to avoid being killed myself. If you want to see more equestrian gaming content, you should consider liking this video, and if you're watching on a mobile device, hello, you can swipe across the comments and hype the video. This really helps boost it. If you love horses, you should subscribe. It's free. And if you truly can't get enough of equines, you can check out pinehavenponies.co.uk, where we sell beautiful Breyer and Schleich models, all at a discount in celebration of the Year of the Horse. We do ship internationally, that's pinehavenponies.co.uk. Today's question is, if you had to choose a magical power, what would you pick? The ability to fly, the ability to mind read, super strength, or invisibility? Tell me your answer in the comments below. Day one, I was so excited to start in this new and mystical world. I had my first magic sighting almost immediately, spotting what looked like fairies or some sort of pixie floating around. I was also aware that I knew very little about which mobs were friendly and which weren't, so I didn't get too close. I was wearing a super cute skin that was based off of an elf, and even though I didn't have any elven powers, I still wanted to fit the theme. Despite a whole world of magic and mystery awaiting me, I still had to do the usual. Chop wood, make a crafting table, craft sticks, then a pick, and descend into the earth to mine resources. This was always such an important part of doing any challenge in Minecraft, especially 100 days, of which I have done quite a few by now, but once you've seen one mining montage, you've seen them all, so I'll skip all of the boring bits for you. At one point while cave exploring, I fell into an underground lake, which I discovered was actually a cove as it led to the sea. This wasn't particularly interesting at the time, but I found something lurking in the dark. It'll be tough for you to spot, but a silhouette was visible against the glow lichen, showing some kind of creature in the water with me. It was so early in the challenge, I didn't really mind getting killed, so I allowed my curiosity to guide me closer. In the light of my torch, the creature was revealed, green scales, fins, and a horse head. This was a hippocampus. They were basically fish horses, not to be confused with real-life seahorses. With mermaid-like tails, a long body and fins, they also had 2 front legs and a horse head. They can drag themselves around on the land, a little like seals, but they also have rows of sharp teeth. The hippocampus didn't seem interested in attacking, even swimming up to me a few times to check me out. It was an awesome creature to have seen, even if it was a little creepy in the dark cave like this. Alas, this is a rescue series, and this hippocampus did not seem in need of saving, so I left them be. With all my mind goodies, I got myself a full iron armor set, which displayed on my character as wreaths of flowers. I couldn't help myself. This just looked too pretty to go back to normal armor. I also equipped a full set of iron tools and a sword. I usually don't bother with weapons, as most of my 100-day challenges are done on peaceful mode, but this time things were different. While normal hostile mobs like zombies and skeletons wouldn't spawn, dragons did, and they were not kind beasts like the hippocampus. If you want to see my best friend and I battle the zombie apocalypse, I recommend this 100 days video linked up in the corner, after you watch this one of course. I packed up my makeshift station and resurfaced on day 2, feeling confident with my armor and tools, ready to explore this strange world. In the thicket, I discovered what I could only assume was a fairy home in the shape of a mushroom. Nearby, there were quite a few floating around, and I wasn't sure if they were totally friendly, so I didn't bother them. I butchered a few chickens for meat and then whipped out my furnace to cook. I was up on a hillside, and while waiting for my meal, I looked down to a village below, spotting my first red dangerous enemy. Dragon. It seemed to be terrorizing the village below, setting parts of it ablaze. I wasn't exactly a dragon slayer right now, but I wanted to go down and see what was going on anyway. As I got closer, I could see the creature was in fact attacking. Nearby was its nest, and I was feeling pretty opportunistic, as if the dragon was preoccupied, maybe I could loot the goodies spread around its nest. Climbing into the charred circle, I found chests, most of which didn't contain anything super rare, but these items were going to be useful later on. I did find some diamonds, which was certainly a score. There were also piles of gold that when broken gave gold nuggets. Gold was useful, but I had already mined some from my excursion, so rather than risk becoming a barbecue, I skedaddled and went around the back of the village where the dragon hadn't broken in yet. Inside a church, I found a bestiary, and this book was quite unique. All that was written inside was an introduction, but using the manuscripts I found in a nearby chest, I could combine them to unlock more information inside the book. This was a very cool mechanic, and I made sure to hold on to it so that I could learn more about the creatures that I would come across. I had a look around the village. Most of it was broken or on fire, and eventually, as darkness fell, I picked a relatively unscathed bed to settle down in. Day 3, I was struggling with inventory space. As there were so many new blocks and items that I knew nothing about, I felt the need to hoard everything, just in case it was valuable. But with only 36 slots available, I was running out of room fast. Luckily, nearby there were some cows which dropped meat and leather that I could use to craft a backpack. I spotted yet another dragon flying above, and luckily it hadn't spotted myself or the village. Gathering string from cobwebs, I finally had everything I needed for a bag, which I promptly upgraded with iron to give me the most space I could get right now. Shoving all of my stuff into the backpack, I took the liberty of looting the village further. Usually I would feel bad about taking things that weren't mine, but it appeared that the villagers had long since been eaten, and most buildings were well past repair. Some escaped village sheep offered a source of wool, and the sky proved to be full of dragons. I didn't know if this area was just particularly populated, but I made sure to stay out of their line of sight as best as I could. The first dragon I spotted was still terrorizing one side of the village. Their nest was probably too close, so the beast was simply wiping everything out. I went about looting various chests and buildings, and at one point I had to hide in the grass because it was circling directly overhead. I was a little scared because I had no idea if it was going to randomly descend on me at any moment. But I did get a good look at it, and they are just magnificent beasts. I definitely wanted to tame one, if that was even possible. After escaping the tall grass, I found my first herd of wild horses. Considering all the villagers had been wiped out, yet the animals remained, I was pretty sure that dragons did not eat horses, and these guys seemed pretty happy out here running free, so I opted instead to hunker down in a safe part of the village once more. Day Day 4, I set off in search of new lands. On the horizon, I could see a lush lavender field framed by a hillside, where yet another dragon dominated the sky. I suppose if you like dragons, you'll be seeing plenty of them in this challenge. I spent most of the morning traveling, wishing I had a horse as they were always much faster than my legs. I was surprised to find an empty dragon nest sitting in the shrubs, and I was wary that the occupant could return at any moment. In the chest, I found some obsidian and other goodies, but just as I was leaving, I spotted a deadly black dragon coming my way. I quickly crouched in the shrubs, and when it hovered above where I was hiding, I thought for sure it had seen me. It looked like it was searching the bushes, and I wondered if it knew someone had looted its chests. For a moment, I thought I was in the clear. Then the dragon made a sharp 90-degree turn to fly directly over me, still searching for the trespasser. I was absolutely terrified. I mean, I didn't stand a chance against a fire-breathing beast at this point in time. I snuck from bush to shrub, trying to put some distance between me and the scaly predator. Once I was clear from its line of sight, I helped myself to things from the nearby village it had clearly been chewing through. Here I found some shiny scales, not really sure what they do, but anything that described as shiny, I'm keeping. Maybe I'm just secretly a magpie. The buildings had some goodies, but I was most excited about the melons I found mixed in with some pumpkins. If you've seen my 100 Days in a Deadly Winter, then you know what pains I went through to get melons to make health boost injections, so I was glad I managed to check them off early this time. As it's a rescue challenge, I anticipated needing health injections for any poor horse that was in dire need of a boost. I found a shield too. I usually don't bother with shields, but maybe this would help me fend off dragon attacks. While I didn't plan on facing off anytime soon, I did always run the risk of being spotted by one, so I wanted to at least give myself a fighting chance. Before leaving the village, I gathered hay blocks for animal fodder, although right now I had a decent amount of meat, bones and leather and wool, so I was in no rush to start my farm. I didn't really feel safe here, so I hiked up the hill in the dark, finding a flat patch of land to put down a bed that I nicked from the village. Day 5, I found the surrounding area to be quite interesting topography. This was a carved plateau with a gorgeous mountain in the back. I could imagine building a castle here, with the mountain acting as a natural barricade from attacks coming from the sky. I really love this idea, but after quickly thinking it through, I realized there was not nearly enough space for horses. I don't love stalling swem horses with no run or turnout in the form of pastures, and unfortunately I just couldn't see where I'd have the room to put a castle and horse facilities. Do you think I could have made it work? I really did want to give it a go, but I didn't have enough confidence that it would go well, so I packed up and left, aiming for a village that I could see in the distance. I trekked across the land, and before I reached my destination, I saw a familiar face. Hippocampuses. Hippocampuses. Fish horse. There were quite a few in this river, in all sorts of pretty colours. There was even a tiny little baby! This place seemed magical, and upon swimming to the other side, I discovered that the river was less a river and more a closed moat, surrounding an island. As soon as I realised this, I knew I'd found the place. Sure, it didn't have a spectacular mountain backdrop, or even a magical forest surrounding it, but the land was just how I liked it, relatively flat and empty. It wasn't a huge space, but I was confident that I could fit everything I wanted onto it, even if the pasture space was kind of limited. If you can't already tell, I'm pretty sure this is where I'm going to build my home. Would you have picked the island, or would you have preferred I try to build on the mountainside? The baby hippocampi swam beneath the dock of the nearby village, one of which actually looked untouched by dragons, which I was actually thankful for. Plus, it was right by the island, so I like the idea of having villager neighbors. That wasn't going to stop me snooping around though, and while I didn't take anything, as I mostly had all of the stuff from the previous 2 villages, I do like to browse. I had completely let my guard down, assuming it was safe here, until I heard a villager take damage. I opened the door only to come face to face with a green dragon. Weirdly, it showed no interest in me, preferring instead to hunt the villager. As it lumbered around, it destroyed blocks without even having to release a fireball. This made me so sad. Once again, a village was about to be destroyed by a dragon. So I placed down a bed and went to do something about it. Just as it ate another villager, taking down a house with them, I struck the beast with my sword. To my surprise, it didn't turn around and attempt to fend off the attack. Instead, it just roared, slamming into more structures and eventually trying to fly away. At this point, I'm kind of down for the chase. This dragon was eating people and smashing up the village, and I was here to stand up for them now. I do wish the battle was more epic, but it mainly consisted of the dragon barreling through buildings, occasionally setting things on fire, and mostly running away from me. It started to get quite tedious as my sword wasn't doing much damage, so I took a quick pause to craft a lead and then lassoed the beast. Eventually, I was then able to deliver the killing blow. I was a little sad, actually. The body didn't just disappear like most mobs, instead its lifeless form lay on the ground, and I felt a little remorse for what I had done. It was quite beautiful up close where I could see its scales, all of the green hues of its body, as well as the magnificent wings. It technically wasn't doing anything to me. It didn't even fight back when I attacked it. But I was trying to protect the villagers and their home, so I was quite torn about what I had done. Things got a little more heart-wrenching when I realized I could take the scales from its body, leaving only a skeleton behind. Harvesting the skeleton gave me bones and a skull, and when that was done, nothing was left of the once great beast. I slept at the village that night, and day 6 I spotted yet another dragon flying in the sky. This one was bright red, and if I had to guess, was some sort of fire dragon. As scary as it was, I think it was a little too far away to attack the village, at least for now. I did spot a mountain that looked pretty flat and considered checking it out, but there seemed to be so many dragons in that direction, so I abandoned the idea. Also, I did spot some wild ponies. I made my way back over to the island and began sculpting. When starting landscaping, I usually try and remove any awkward layers of dirt and then guess what would fit where and dig accordingly. I wasn't going to flatten the whole island, just smooth it out. While toiling away in the sun, I saw yet another dragon, this time flying north of the village across the island moat. I'm relatively certain it was far away enough that it would leave me alone, as long as I didn't catch its attention or accidentally lead it home. After filling in various holes and ditches, I got to googling some house inspo. If you've seen any of my previous 100 days, you'll know exactly where I went. Croissant Cat's YouTube channel. I couldn't find a house that fit the aesthetic, but they did have this potion shop that I figured I could turn into a residence. I picked the highest point on the island and started marking out the schematics and guides for the house. I didn't have any fancy terracotta to mark the ground, so I just used a ditch and some cobblestone. There were some cows on the island, which was a nice bonus because now I had a source of meat and leather. Once darkness fell, I nervously checked the skies once more, confirming the dragon had not come any closer. Day 7, I had the layout of the house done and checked, but I had very little building materials. As pretty as the original block palette was, I was going to stick with my usual oak and white concrete look since it made the place look cottagecore and whimsical. Before I left, I dumped all of my items into some barrels and crafted a bunch of tools, then swam across the moat and entered the brush. It was exploring time. The shrubs help hide me from the dragons that stalk the sky, and I spotted some really pretty coloured trees in the distance. I would have to go and get some leaves for decoration at some point. Other than a few bushes, I wasn't able to get a huge amount of logs in this biome, so I hiked onwards, coming across a purple flower field. I briefly stopped to check out a graveyard, but there was very little of interest here. I found some bison and they had babies! I genuinely had never seen a baby bison before, despite the animal being a frequent sighting in my 100 days. They were uber cute, and I just wanted to kiss their little schnoz. Unfortunately, my adventuring was cut short by nightfall, but day 8 I finally found some full-size trees to fell. I adored the falling animation. I first discovered the mod in my 100 Days Winter Edition, and I am never going back to regular tree cutting. I made my way further and further into the sparse forest, gathering all the materials I thought I'd need. I found a body of water and went to investigate, hoping to find more hippocampuses. But I found something of far more interest instead. At first I was wary. I didn't know what I was seeing, worried it was some sort of feathered dragon, and when I got closer I realised it was an actual, real-life Pegasus. They seem to be tangled in the reeds, unable to lift their body out of the water. This reminded me of Flora, the mule I rescued in the past, and I knew that the lake and pond water made the ground unstable and slippery, usually resulting in the animal being unable to pull themselves out. I jumped into action, using my leads to drag them out of the water. Once on dry land, I could see her name was Seraphina and she was a mare. Strangely, she looked perfectly healthy, with a high headset, so I concluded she must have become stuck in the pond fairly recently. She was a gorgeous black and white pinto with huge feathery wings. As much as I wanted to saddle up and fly off into the horizon, she probably needed a little bit of rest, and that wasn't exactly the most ethical thing to do. We had only just met and I had to work on gaining her trust first and foremost. We started heading for home, with our first rescue of the challenge being a quiet success. We stopped briefly so that I could check her over and to feed her an apple, which I think she enjoyed. We ran into a slight problem though. There was a dragon circling overhead, and Seraphina wasn't exactly inconspicuous with her huge wings. This approach slowed us down, and we only managed to reach the moat just as the sun was setting. Seraphina wasn't a big fan of swimming, and I had to drag her across the water while she tried to paddle back to shore. I would certainly have to build a bridge at some point to avoid this in the future. By the time we reached the island, it was dark, with nothing but her magnificent silhouette visible against the moonlight. I didn't have a paddock set up yet, I wasn't expecting to have a rescue horse this soon, and I was a little worried she would try to fly away. Playing it safe, I opted to leave her ground-tied until I could make her something more secure. Day 9, I said good morning to our new steed and jumped right back into landscaping. I put my house building on hold for now, needing a stable block far more than a roof over my own head. After getting a pretty large flat section of the island done, I picked out some inspiration stables from YouTube, starting to put down an outline. The biggest issue I had with most stable designs was the fact they were usually built for vanilla horses, who were quite a bit smaller than the swem horses. This meant the stalls were almost always too cramped for a swem horse, let alone a Pegasus, so I eyeballed some measurements for the new stables and hoped that I could make it work. By day 10, I was putting in the oak pillars. These marked the edges of the stables, as well as the center tower that would act as a tack and feed room. I was relatively happy with the dimensions of it all, but quickly realized I had no granite for the base, so off I popped into the caves to excavate. When I had more than enough granite, plus some more ores, I placed in the base of the building during the night. I've complained about this before, but as gorgeous as this resource pack is, the nighttime is almost impossibly dark, so I do apologize if you're struggling to see what I'm doing. I just didn't want to waste any time, and despite the limited visibility, I was aware that Seraphina was still ground-tied, which wasn't very humane. Day 11, I made some headway on the roof. The design wasn't too difficult, it just used a lot of stairs. I was mainly focusing on one side of the stable block so that I could give Seraphina a place to rest, even if it wasn't massive. Speaking of, I went and grabbed her so that she could model a stall for me. That way I could be sure it was big enough and could also accommodate her wings, which is something I've never had to do before. She certainly looked cozy inside, and I was relieved to see that it didn't look like you should be calling the RSPCA on me. The roof was high up enough that it didn't crunch her wings down, and I quite like how open the sides were, so I kept that in mind for when I designed the interior. But now I was aware of the fact that I had no water buckets, no hay feeders, and no gates for her to be comfortable in her stall, so I shifted my focus to the middle of the courtyard, where I measured out a large round pen. Staying true to the stable design, I used oak logs to mark out the edges and granite for the walls. It seemed like a pretty good size to me, and while it wasn't a huge open pasture where she could run free, it was a place to stretch her legs and graze. I quickly gathered some leaves from a nearby tree to use in the fencing. Time was getting on now, and I really didn't want to have to ground tie her for a fourth night, so when the round pen was secured with leaves, I went to go get her. And she's already fallen asleep inside the unfinished stable. Well, if she was comfortable enough to fall asleep, she'd be okay for one more night. Before going to bed myself, I crafted 2 pink gates and some fences so that when she woke up, she would be secure in her stall. Day 12, I woke up bright and early to check in on her. I could see by the dirt in her stable she'd already begun grazing, which is a good sign as eating meant she was in good health. I could also see her wings had a good amount of space, so even though the design was a little makeshift right now, it would work. I went into her stall to grab the lead that I had dropped, and I was surprised when she walked right over for a hug. I had had cuddly horses in the past, but they usually took a bit of time to warm up to me. It did make me wonder if she actually belonged to someone, considering how calm she was around me, but I guess I'd never really know. Once I was sure she was a happy girlie, I left her to her grazing to get started on more land clearing, this time for farming. Seraphina was clearly in need of a balanced diet, and the only way I could achieve that was to grow our own food. The bit of land I cleared was a little jagged and uneven, but by bordering it with some leaves, I think it looked a little more presentable. I crafted a hoe and some buckets, and of course, I made sure to bring water to Seraphina. Since horse buckets needed kelp, which is something I didn't have yet, I gave her a 2x2 water source to keep her hydrated in the meantime. If you don't know, a water source that is 2x2, like this one, is infinite, because if you take from any of the corners, it immediately fills back up again. Little life hack for you. I was back at the farm, bordering the ledge with oak slabs so that I didn't trample the crops when I descended onto this level, plus it made it look a little more put together. Then in go the water sources for the soil. I'm not particularly calculating or efficient with this, I'm just going off of vibes. Then I toil away, tilling the soil until the ground is prepped. I don't have loads of seeds, but I do have some of the 3 that I need. Day 13, I woke to find a bison by my bed. They seem to be the only one on the island, so I had no intention of removing them, and if you like bison, you'll be pleased to know this guy right here makes pretty frequent appearances. I went and grabbed Seraphina, who had her head poking over the gate, so I assumed she was happy for a change in scenery. I led her to the round pen where I gave her water and let her graze a little before trying to put on the saddle pad. That's when I realized she wasn't even tame. This wild Pegasus had been acting like a domesticated horse, so much so I thought she might have even had a previous owner. This did mean I had to tame her, and while she bucked me off a few times, she wasn't exactly the wildest bronco. If anything, she seemed more mildly perturbed that I was sitting on her back. I had her ground tied because I was a little worried she would try to fly off if she didn't want to be tamed. Eventually, she accepted me, and I figured since she was so receptive, I'd try placing a blanket on her back. She was so unbothered by this, so much so she resumed eating like nothing had happened. I took this as a good sign and went one step further, placing a saddle on her back. Again, no theatrics, just more munching. I led her around the pen so that she could get used to the feeling and weight of tack. Still, not particularly fussed, and she wasn't trying to rip the lead out of my hand to graze, which confirmed that she really just was that chill. She was absolutely magnificent, and I do admit I was taking every opportunity to further our bonding so that we could take to the skies as quickly as possible. I opted to leave the tack on her for a little bit and let her relax. Not that she was worked up at all, but I would keep an eye on her while I continued to work on the roof. Construction was going pretty well on the stables, and I worked through the night, bringing us to day 14. With the roof now complete, I was satisfied that Seraphina had adequate shelter should she need it. I found her munching away at the grass that was trying very hard to regrow in her stall, and then gulping down some water. We repeated the process from yesterday, leading her into the round pen, letting her graze, and then placing tack on her. Still as relaxed as before, I decided I could slip a bridle over her head. She had a quick shake as she got used to the new feeling, but didn't show any signs of discomfort. I really couldn't help myself. I wanted to ride her so badly, and so far she seemed totally fine with it, so after giving her a moment, I hopped onto her back. From up here, her wings looked ginormous. They were absolutely stunning, and it took a minute to admire them. Other than a quick head shake, she didn't really protest to the new weight, and we began slowly walking around the pen. I'm telling you, I'm still not convinced this was a wild Pegasus. Maybe she became feral after losing her original rider, because there is no way a horse who has never been handled, had tack on, or been ridden was this calm about everything. Well, who am I to look a gift horse in the mouth? I figured we may as well set off on our first quest together to see how things went. I was after kelp, which I mentioned earlier. I'm not entirely sure why kelp was chosen as the item to let you craft basically everything in the swem mod, but I was sure I'd be able to find open water where it grew. The bison saw us off, and I wondered if I could get Seraphina to take off and avoid the moat, and momentarily we had liftoff before plunging into the water. I wasn't exactly sure how to ask for flight, but I was kind of hoping she would choose to fly rather than use her legs. Clearly, she had no intention of doing that right now, and I chalked it up to still needing to gather her strength. We made our way through the shrubs, being very careful to avoid detection from hungry dragons. The black dragon that I stole from seemed particularly mean, so I gave it a wide berth. We cantered over lush lavender fields, and usually I don't bother with third person, but I was obsessed when I saw how gorgeous her wings looked. I literally couldn't get over this horse. I felt so lucky to have been able to rescue her. Just look at the movement in her wings when she moves. I aimed for a village that was an interesting landmark, and with Seraphina's steady pace, we reached our destination in no time. Luck had it that this was actually a beach village, and open water stretched out as far as the eye could see. I dismounted, opting to remove her bridle and let her graze since she clearly loved munching grass. The light was fading fast, and I dove into the depths to collect kelp. By the time I was done, the night sky auroras had come out and were dancing across the stars. Usually I would sleep and wait until morning to travel, but I thought there was a chance that the dragons slept at night, meaning we'd actually be safer if we tried to get home now. As we traversed the meadows, I thought for sure my assumption had been wrong when I saw one flying in the sky. Now, I wasn't paying proper attention, and in the dark, I practically rode right up to the black dragon's nest. Luckily, it was asleep, and I was able to calmly trot away, hoping Seraphina wouldn't whinny or stand on any twigs. We got home safely, and I dried out the kelp in the furnace, making sure I had enough to craft everything I could possibly want. In the early hours of day 15, I made barrels so that I could provide water to everyone, dyeing them all sorts of cute pastel colours. I also toasted some leaves to create stall shavings, and even though the floor of the stalls were currently grass, it wouldn't hurt to give the horses an extra soft place to sleep. The rain was coming down now, so I figured now was the best time to deck out the stalls since I had no pasture blankets to turn Seraphina out in. I placed a pastel pink bucket in her stall, equipped with a tap for ease of use, and she showed me her gratitude by swimming in her water source. Thanks for that. Despite clearly wanting a pool, I did cover up the hole with dirt. The rain had stopped before midday, so I turned her out into the round pen so that I could freely lay down some shavings in her stall while she grazed out in the sun. Once there was a plush layer of bedding waiting for her when she was brought back in, I got on with more building, mostly putting up oak support beams along the stables. Turtle! It's actually a tortoise, but potato. I switched the gates around too. They open inwardly, which was 1, unusual for stall doors anyway, and 2, meant the horses would get stuck on the gates when I was trying to lead them out, so opening to the aisle was much more preferable. In the afternoon, Seraphina was brought back into her stable, and I think she quite liked the upgrade. If I'm being totally honest, the space probably needed to be 1 block bigger on all sides, and this was probably the absolute smallest I would go for a swem horse stall. I worked through the night putting in shavings, gates, fences, and buckets to all the stables so that they would be ready for future residents. Seraphina was the absolute cutest when she was snoozing. I really do love the animation the swem horses have, and the details of the wings folding around themselves was so lovely. The sunrise for day 16 was gorgeous. I appreciated it fully before cracking on with the roof once more. I was trying to give Seraphina enough time to recoup and recover because I hope to do some flying with her pretty soon. So in the meantime, I was going to get some of the building out of the way. Of course, she was turned out into the round pen to graze and enjoy the nice weather. I did a harvest of the few crops I had, replanting more seeds, and I was happy that my farmland was expanding. Seraphina got hand-fed a few bushels of hay, which I think she enjoyed. Also, look how cute all the stalls look with the rainbow gates. I was definitely going to try and go for the rainbow theme for this challenge, since to me, rainbows are quite magical, even though they are real, unlike unicorns and Pegasi. And dragons. This is the current setup for the stables. I had intended to put hay nets into all of them, but I ended up skipping on that because, spoiler, I kept the grass footing so horses could graze even when they were indoors. I know that's not super realistic, but my horse is a Pegasus, so that's not really what we're going for this time. I crafted a grooming brush and got to bond with Seraphina for a little bit, and even when I caught her with a lead, she still wasn't done munching. Of course, being in a stall didn't stop her from eating around the shavings. You may have noticed I've moved her to the purple stall, and that was because I think purple was more her colour than pink, so of course, she got a halter to match. After dumping more of my loot into random barrels, I crafted a vet check bag so that I could accurately determine the health of any horse, and I was pleased to see Seraphina had missed no drinks and no meals, so I was sort of hoping that was going to be my green light for flight. In the dark, I made a pitchfork and hung it up outside her stall so that when I needed to muck out, I didn't have to do it with my hands. Yeah, think about that next time you're picking up horse poop in Minecraft. I bred some cows on the island, mostly just to buff up their numbers, and even though I didn't have a pasture for them yet, it wasn't like they were going to swim away, as like most mobs in Minecraft, they could float in water, but couldn't actually move forward. To finish the night, I made a crafting backpack upgrade. This basically just adds a crafting table inside your backpack, so you didn't have to faff around and put down a table. Nifty. Day 17, I had a plan. In order to construct the tower in the stable block, my house, and any other buildings, I needed white concrete because that's the palette that I was going for. To make white concrete powder, I required sand, gravel, and white dye. I had loads of white dye from all of the bones I'd been picking up, plus animals drop bones when they died too, so I would only be out collecting sand and gravel. Seraphina and I, suited and booted, ready to head off the island. I was hoping the water would encourage her to take off rather than swim, But she actually refused to do either. I didn't want to just give up, so we tried again. This time she jumped into the water. It was like she wanted to take off, but couldn't, so would just jump instead. We travelled past the village and into a meadow that was teeming with dragons. It did seem that they left the wildlife alone, as there were families of bison. I looted an empty nest that I assumed belonged to the green dragon who I slayed in the village. After I was done, we carefully picked our way through the meadow, avoiding these scaly beasts in the sky as best as we could. I was hoping to find a desert biome as they had the most abundance of sand, but I quickly pivoted after crossing a small marsh where dunes lay between sand and sea. This was probably my best bet, so I hitched Seraphina up, noting a bright red dragon in the sky. I also noticed some hippocampuses in the water next to a shipwreck, and while I went over to loot it, I was quickly distracted by the sight of an orange and blue hippocampus swimming in a waterlogged section of the ship. At first, I thought it was cute, but I soon realized this guy couldn't actually get out of the boat. He was swimming around and pushing up against the side that led to the sea, but it seemed his body was too big to fit through the small gap that was submerged in the boat's side, and due to the decaying platforms, it couldn't get a grip in order to pull itself out on land. Of course, I had to help and started working on breaking down the partition between the boat's water and open ocean. If I had to guess, the hippocampus swam in here when it was smaller, but ended up growing too big for the gap, and while its friends or family stayed nearby, they were trapped inside. When the hippocampus was free, it did a few celebratory circles before swimming off to join the others, and while I would have loved to bring it back to my island where I could introduce it to the hippocampi that live near there, it did seem like this creature was happiest out here. With another successful rescue complete, I got on with the task of sand collection, being careful to excavate in natural patterns so as not to ruin the landscape. The sun began to set and I gazed out to the hippocampus swimming by the shore, hoping I had won their favour. Making sure Seraphina was ground-tied, I threw my bedroll down and slept through the night. Day 18, I packed up camp and said goodbye to the hippocampuses before jumping on Seraphina. We followed the river upstream because most rivers were rich with clay and gravel, which is just what we were looking for. The blood-red dragon we had seen yesterday was circling overhead and making me quite nervous, so I wasted no time diving into the stream and bringing up shovels of gravel. I did have to dig around lobsters that sat at the bottom of the river. When I was happy with my haul, I mounted up and crossed the water, not with the intention of going straight home, but rather going out and exploring the land. There were so many unusual and new biomes that I hadn't seen before, and I wanted to see the sights before I had to return to building. Of course, I headed straight for a blue forest, because, you know, trees aren't meant to be blue. The excitement was short-lived as the scenery quickly changed into regular forest, which I had to navigate carefully, as I didn't want Seraphina's wings to catch on branches. Then we were spat out by a river again, and the most magnificent mountain stood before us. Not going to lie, I was a little mad that I didn't choose this as my base location. Maybe I can do a part 2 and create like a Pegasus school or something. You have to like the video and tell me in the comments if you want that though. Instead of fighting my way through more trees, I opted to have Seraphina swim along the river. It was slower, but not only was the view clearer for me to see my surroundings, but it also meant I wasn't going to constantly bump my head on branches, which was all too common with tall swem horses. I did opt to canter where the meadows banked the river, and I was once again in awe of the biome, wishing I had chosen here as my home. This meadow was so open, so beautifully sprinkled with flowers. I think I had just been so keen to choose a home so I could start saving horses that I didn't spend very much time scouting the area. Then I was back in the river swimming along. The forest was looking dense on either side, so I didn't have much choice but to continue upstream. Before it got dark, I spotted the lights of a village where I replaced Seraphina's bridle with a halter so she would be more comfortable and holed up in a church overnight. Day 19, we carefully picked our way through this new village, where I was pleased to see it was intact, unlike the other 3 villages I had come across. I decided to have a wander around to see if there was anything of use in the chests, and that was when I discovered these huge pastel wisteria looking trees. The ones in the village were actually missing their trunks, and following the glaring hole, I realized that a dragon had in fact already taken a chunk out of the place. That absolutely sucked, and while following the path of destruction, I noticed there was no fire, so the dragon had probably left a while ago, until I stepped on a very painful ice shard sticking up from the ground. Nearby, a block of ice was sitting on what remained of a church, and after breaking it, I was surprised it actually dropped. I found out these were frozen splinters, meaning the dragon that came through here was most likely an ice dragon, and there was a possibility it was still nearby. Remaining vigilant, I continued to explore the village, focusing on harvesting flowers and leaves, as these were absolutely going to make my island as whimsical as possible, and these trees were so gorgeous. As I was collecting, I came across a strange white structure. It was blocky and square, but made entirely of quartz, when none of the nearby village had any quartz in its buildings. Investigating further, I found the front of the structure, and inside I was shocked to see a unicorn. It was caged by some flowery pink fences, which was ironic, and it seemed to be tied down on both sides, forcing it to face outwards. I could tell the creature was in poor health due to its low headset, and looking into the structure, I was baffled. It had various mushrooms and crystals placed inside, and if I had to guess, the villagers had probably caught the unicorn and made some sort of shrine to it, but instead of learning how to take care of the animal, they just filled its enclosure with a bunch of mystical looking items. I wish I knew where this unicorn came from and how it came to be in this situation, but the thing had sad eyes, and I knew I had to help them. I learned their name was Solace, and they were a stallion. Their horn was impossibly long and sharp, which was a little intimidating. He also had these big feathers on his feet, which, if you don't know, is the term used to describe the long hair around a horse's hooves and up their legs. Yep, feathers like birds. Not confusing at all. The first thing I did was tear down all the fencing and break the ropes tying him down. I watched him for a moment, unsure of how to approach, and eventually he wandered out of the shrine. The poor thing was obviously in need of help, so I leashed him and brought him over to Seraphina, and they met for the first time. I decided the best thing to do was to head home as quickly as possible, and despite the darkness, it was actually going to be pretty easy to travel thanks to the river. In almost pitch black, Seraphina swam upstream with me on her back and Solace ponying behind. He wasn't thrilled at having to swim, but he didn't put up too much of a fuss, probably because he was so tired. In the moonlight we swam, and I used a torch to attempt to see a little better. I was a bit worried about creatures in the water, and while I knew a hippocampus wouldn't attack, I've had problems with crocodiles before, and goodness knows what else might be lurking in the dark. We didn't have a choice though, so we pressed on. Once we reached an embankment, Solace immediately collapsed on the ground, too exhausted to keep going. I couldn't drag him all the way home, and Seraphina was probably desperate for a rest too, so I swapped her bridle for a halter and she lay down next to Solace. I retired to my sleeping bag, not too far from the 2 equines. Day 20, we were up at dawn, fighting our way through the trees. I wasn't thrilled at having to take this route, but the river wound in the opposite direction, and I wasn't sure how far it went, so this was really our only option. I had to dismount a few times to clear trees and leaves so that the horses could actually fit through the gaps, and Solace still held his head low, probably from dehydration and possibly starvation. I was so relieved to see our island with the hippocampuses swimming around the water and my half-finished stable block. After one more river crossing, we were finally home, and Solace was dropped off in a round pen which would serve as quarantine for the next few days. When introducing a new horse to a herd, especially rescues that you didn't know the background of, it's important to separate them for a time to help prevent possible disease spread. It can also help acclimatize the new horse to their surroundings and peers. Seraphina was put in her stall, wasting no time jumping straight back into grazing once her bridle was off. I would need to make more paddocks soon, as right now all I had was the round pen, and that was obviously occupied, so Seraphina had no turnout. I was pleased to see Solace had begun grazing. That was a good sign, as eating indicated an appetite. You'd have to worry more if a horse had no interest in grazing. I grabbed a pink bucket from my barrels and set it up in the round pen so that Solace had access to water right away. Unfortunately, the buckets didn't hold much water, so I would have to check it frequently. I stayed in the round pen with him a while, studying him. He was a beautiful creature, snow-white coat with spiky, fjord-like yellow mane with yellow feathers to match. And of course, the most beautiful thing about him was the huge yellow horn that stuck out from his forehead. I wondered if he could do magic or had any special powers. If he did, he was clearly too weak to use them. I wasn't as worried with him as I was with Seraphina, as I don't think he could fly away. Then again, despite her huge wings, neither did she. I took a little bit of time to decorate the stables with pink leaves that I had collected. The place definitely needed more work, but it was starting to come together. I got Solace a pastel yellow head collar that he accepted without fuss, the colour perfectly matching his natural hues. That made me realise he was tame. Either the villagers tamed him, he had a previous owner, or maybe he accepted people who treated him well. I chose to believe in the third option. I gave him a brush which he thoroughly enjoyed, and even though we barely knew each other, he gave off an air of calm that was quite rare in rescue horses. I think there was a chance he knew I had saved him, and that made me wonder if unicorns were especially intelligent. As the sun set, I started tackling my next big task, crafting concrete. I finally had all the materials I needed, and by combining white dye, sand and gravel, voila! White concrete powder. Now all I needed to do was spend a ridiculous amount of time wetting the powder to make concrete blocks. Hooray! Before that though, the rain started coming down pretty hard, and I couldn't just leave Solace outside in this weather, so even though his quarantine was far from complete, I moved him to a stall that was very far from Seraphina's. Hopefully this wouldn't cause an issue, and it got him out of the rain. He settled down pretty quickly, snuggling up in the warm shavings. I then head out to the moat and start building a single tower block of concrete powder. My plan is to break the bottom block which sits in the water, which will cause the powder above it to fall and harden, rinse and repeat. But I build up really high in order to maximize efficiency, and as you can see, it is ridiculously dark thanks to the cloud cover and rain. I know there's water below me, I just can't see it. So I jump down from my tower and fall directly on a single lily pad, which kills me. Fantastic! I've just lost 10 whole levels of XP. I thought I was going to die from something far more exciting like a dragon attack, but in the end, it was gravity that got me. Eventually, I did get back on track, processing all of my white concrete and starting construction on the stable tower. In the light of day 21, I saw a blue jay flitting around the stables. I hope they would stick around as I quite like the birds. As the rain was still bucketing down, both horses stayed indoors while I very carefully built the tower, doing my best not to slip thanks to the slick surface. By midday, we were back to clear skies, and I had made a pretty good progress, finishing the first floor of the tower. The dimensions were a little squiff, as I needed as much floor and wall space as possible. I also built a deck out of granite, and I think it was starting to come together. My main concern was just how small and vertical the tack and feed room would be, but I suppose I'd cross that bridge when I got to it. I checked in on Solace, who was looking much healthier, his head set higher than when I picked him up. He also looked ethereal in the dying sunlight. I topped up his water and he poked his head over the stable doors, which was so sweet. Then I was back to it. All through the night, I was laying concrete and wood supports, and on day 22, the second section was pretty much done. I was starting to get a little nervous as the top was much bigger than its base, and I was a little concerned it would end up looking strange. Solace was staring out of his stable, and if you don't know, my rescue fjord Leo from 100 Days in a Deadly Winter spent a lot of time staring in a particular direction, which I brushed off at the time, until one day I found a horse freezing in the snow right where he was pointing. So of course I have a look, and other than a mountain plateau, which I slept on day 4, there was a red dragon I hadn't seen before. I know I shouldn't have, but I just assumed the dragon was what he was staring at. I'd keep my eye on him though, and I mucked out Seraphina's stable before heading back up the tower and starting on the roof. So far, all the measurements had worked out, but if there were any kinks, it would definitely show in the roof. I had to be very careful up here, as falling would either result in severe injury or death, so I basically stayed crouched the whole time while laying down oak stairs and pillars. In the afternoon, the rain started up again, and both horses were still in their stable from the last time it rained, so I didn't have to faff around with climbing down from the tower. It did make things almost impossible at night though, as my vision was incredibly limited, but I was determined not to waste any time. Over my many 100 days, I've learnt that you can get so much done in the night hours, so it's important to make the best of the darkness. I also replaced the makeshift wood planks in the stalls with white concrete to help bring the pallet together. I was going to keep the oak fencing on the back and sides, but the taps for the buckets needed a full block to sit on, and I think it didn't look too wonky. I also put up some lanterns. My goal would be to light up almost the entire island as best as I could, so the working at night wasn't such a pain, but that would take some time. It's day 23 now, and I'm doing my daily chores with the horses, which is usually just brushing them, filling up their water buckets, and scooping poop. I made the cutest pink heart doors for the entrance of the tower, and drumroll for the finished look. Ta-da! What do we think? Here is the original inspo. I think I took most of the design from the tower, but it all had my own twist on it. The tower itself was looking a little bulbous at the top, and I was considering extending the stables by one extra stall on the left block to try and balance it out, but it was fine for now. It's giving medieval and fantasy at the same time, which is exactly what I was going for. Plus the palette was super great for mixing in colours like the hanging leaves and rainbow gates without it being too busy. Here's an overview of the island. As you can see, I have ample space left for my house and a few paddocks, although I don't think I'll be able to get an arena on here without extending the land, so I might have to come up with a plan for that. Now, I was determined to get a proper pasture in for the horses. Solace had completed his quarantine, and him and Seraphina had been cooped up in their stables for the last few days. So I spent the rest of the day and night flattening and extending the land to accommodate that. Day 24, I harvested and replanted my field, which was now full of food growing for the horses. I had loads of saplings from the pastel wisteria looking trees, so I dotted a few around the island to help bring in that magical, mystical look. The leaves on these trees had a really pretty falling flower effect on them, and I was kind of obsessed. Then I started on the pasture, first grabbing a bunch of leaves to mark out the perimeter. I quite liked how the leaves looked on the round pen, so I designed the fences around them once I had the shape. While I was putting down the leaves, it looked alright, but unfortunately, one side of the paddock ran along the natural curve of the island, and I was pressed for space near the house, so after topping up the leaves with slabs to ensure the horses couldn't escape, I discovered the train wreck that I had created. From the ground, it felt claustrophobic, and from the sky, you could see what an absolute eyesore this thing was. Sure, there was enough space for 2 horses, but it was so ugly and clashed quite badly with the uniformity of the stable. That night, I did everything in my power to rectify this, adding dirt and grass to give me more space to work with. In the middle of the night, while I was laying down some pathing, I was of course focused on that, so it scared the life out of me when this massive dark blob roared, and I quickly realized it was just the bison. This guy had been freaking me out ever since I arrived, but this was the first time he actually scared the living daylights out of me, mostly because I couldn't see him. After allowing my heart rate to return to normal, I continued pathing, connecting the stables to the paddock entrance on day 25. Here is what the improved paddock looked like, much better than my first attempt. This time I focused on straight lines and even diagonals rather than waving and random curves. It did look like a square pasture that had a bite taken out of it, but extending the land out into the moat would not only be a headache, but could disrupt the wildlife. Speaking of wildlife, I did have to wrangle a tortoise from the paddock back into the water, not sure how he ended up in there. I decorated the path with stone buttons. This was one of my favourite little build hacks to make paths seem more 3D and dynamic because they look like little stones or pebbles. I said hi to Solace, who was poking his head over the gates, clearly bored with being stuck inside. Then I witnessed the bison up to more shenanigans. He would mostly appear and then run away really quickly. Bison had a unique sprint ability, but that did turn him into a large jump scare when he did it. I put a pink and blue gate on the pasture. I wish there were rainbow gates to use, but for now I just got to mix and match and make it colourful. Finally, I let Seraphina out and she was the first to try out the new space. The bison followed closely behind, and I can only assume he was a fan of it too. I went out to the wild patch on the island and collected some grass to put in the pasture and round pen, making sure the horses had enough to munch on. I wanted to give Seraphina a chance to acclimate to the pasture before introducing Solace, so I went about my day doing evening jobs and putting in lights in the tower, planting sugarcane, and reinforcing the roof on the stables. Day 26, I introduced Solace to Seraphina over the pasture gate. I assumed at this point that despite his horn being super pointy, he didn't actually use it as a weapon. He stared at her from behind the gate and she didn't seem too fussed, interested instead in grazing. I took that as my signal that everything was chill and I allowed him inside. Within moments, the two were grazing side by side, clearly content with the company rather than the excitement of a new horse. It probably helps as well that they travelled home together and were stabled in the same block for the last few days. The bison was staring creepily as usual. Later that day, I caught Seraphina and got her ready for a ride out. I had seen rainbow glass in my items list, but I needed some sort of special rainbow plant for it, and I was aiming to find it today. I figured the mystical pastel forest was my best bet, so we headed back the way we'd come after rescuing Solace. After some generic flower picking, I did actually manage to find the rainbow rose that I was looking for. I was pretty chuffed, and after grabbing almost every single plant I could find, we made our way home. Or at least, I thought we were making our way home. It was hard to tell because the trees obscured so much of my vision, and I think I got a little turned around when I was collecting the roses. Darkness fell, and my only option was to climb the hill and stand on the treetops to try and get my bearing. Thankfully, I managed to spot the faint light emitting from inside the stable tower, and that allowed me to reorient myself and aim for home this time. Dragons circled in the night, and I was not keen on letting them see me. We did make it home unscathed, and Seraphina plopped down in her stable as soon as she was untacked. I was a little disappointed she hadn't flown yet. I wasn't quite sure what I was doing wrong here. In the night, I made a pond in the paddock so that the horses had a water source, then made a bunch of rainbow glass for the tower. I absolutely adored the way these looked. The colours were slightly pastel, but not super faded. They looked so whimsical, and I quickly filled all the windows in. In the daylight of day 27, I loved them even more, and found they work quite well as stable dividers too. I opted to keep the oak fences, but instead of leaving the tops totally open, the glass added a huge pop of colour and protection from the wind. I mean, this design is just ridiculously cute. I've been having a lot of fun with experimenting with different colours and styles, as usually I stick to quite basic colours. This time, I was going rainbow and no one could stop me. To add to my colour madness, I started adding leaves to the roof, and this added a really nice cottagecore pastel hobbit look. My biggest gripe was that most of the other leaves are 3D, but these were 2D, so they were lacking voluminosity. I did this on both sides of the stable, and I liked it, but I was sure I'd go back to touch it up later. Solace was hanging out in the pasture looking very healthy and happy. My biggest issue at the moment was because the horses spent all day grazing, I had to endure non-stop eating sounds. I mean, it's very excessive. You've got to imagine listening to this for 3 hours while you build. Day 28, I brought in Solace on account of the rain and gave him a good grooming to ensure he was clean. I did also witness a rainbow that went directly over the stables, and I took this as a sign that I was on the right track. I decided to spend some time crafting Solace some tack so that I could ride him, settling on a full set of sunshine gear, which I thought would perfectly match his mane and feathers. When I returned, I found a wandering trader admiring my stables, and I did feel quite validated by his apparent awe. Seraphina was turned out, and I hitched Solace outside of his stall to get him ready for his first ride. He accepted the tack, as I realized before he was tame, so I wouldn't be starting from scratch like I did with Seraphina. He looked strapping in his gear. I opted for a bitless cloth bridle and a bareback saddle pad to be as lightweight and comfortable as possible. I brought him into the round pen so that we could begin. As usual, I gave him a moment to look around. Now call me crazy, but this is a horse girl dream moment. He walks over and presents his back to me. This was like one step from him lying down for me to climb on. I mean, you can't make this up. A unicorn giving me the go-ahead to ride him? That's nuts. I was pretty thrilled, if you can't tell, and I hopped up and started walking around. He was ridiculously easy to ride, so attentive and gentle. Plus, what a stunning first-person view. Just a spiky yellow mane and a big golden horn in front of me. If I wasn't in love with him before, I definitely am now. I decided to take my noble steed for a spin and look for some chickens. I needed eggs for the sweet feed, and I was intending to make a coop. Here's a fun fact about unicorns. They are the national animal of Scotland. Pretty cool, right? Do you know what the national animal of your country is? If you do, comment down below so that I can learn too. I searched the brush for many hours, finding sheep and cows and bison, but no chickens. They were much smaller mobs, and my searching had to be more thorough as I may miss them amongst the leaves and bushes. In the dead of night, just as it ticked over to day 29, I found some scurrying around pink trees in the lavender fields. I wrangled them up as best as I could and towed them home. All was well until I started struggling with the leads. See, it was so dark, I couldn't tell if I had managed to tie the chickens to the ground, and my signals to Solace became confusing, so he sent me a clear message to knock it off by throwing out a buck. Unfortunately, a few of the chickens were caught by his hoof and probably turned into chicken breast and feathers. Whoops. I got Solace into his stable just as the light was beginning to flood the island, and I hoped he could get a few hours of rest before having to get up again. I returned to the chickens to find 5 had survived our little mishap, and while I don't know which were male and which were female, I figured 5 was a pretty good gamble to have at least one of each. Using the same materials that appeared in the stable, I started on a freehand coop. I didn't use any references for this, I wasn't planning on doing anything extravagant, so I figured I could at least handle a basic coop on my own. I finished the coop that afternoon and brought his new residents inside. They produced the cutest little baby chick, and I was pretty happy with how the build turned out. They had a little free roam area to relax in, a sheltered coop to nest and sleep in, and I even used some of the rainbow glass to really bring in that fantasy look. That evening, I crafted some bags of sweet feed now that I have eggs and store them in the still empty stable tower. I would need to decorate it ASAP. Day 30, I found a wandering trader holding a carton of milk, which made me giggle, and started my daily chores of grooming and turning the horses out to pasture. I was in a buildy mood, so I started construction on my house. I had to follow the tutorial very carefully because the design was a little trickier than I had anticipated. But after doing the supports, upper walls, and roof, things were chugging along smoothly. Day 31, I had finished the top section, and I absolutely adored these fantasy, witchy, medieval-looking flicks at the edge of the roof. So much so that I had copied it onto the chicken chicken coop, and the stables. It was giving Viking a little bit, like Nordic, but I think the overall vibe was there. I connected the path from the stables to the house and tried one too many times to place down some double doors. Then all that was left was to fill in the walls, floors, and windows. Here it is complete. It was definitely on the smaller side for a house, but I've learned that I don't really spend much time indoors anyway. I think everything on the island matched and was pretty well laid out and functional as it should be. I really loved getting these overhead shots and seeing how much everything changes over time. Of course, there is lots more to add, but for now I think we were more than ready to take on more rescues. The tower had this empty balcony that I thought would look better with a pile of hay on it, and I was right. I plopped down a huge pile of bales in the paddock too, and Solace got right to work munching on it. I spent the rest of the evening crafting and placing yellow fairy lights around the place, helping to light up all the paths and pastures without being too obtrusive. Day 32, I woke up to see Solace and Seraphina hanging out together, Unicorn and Pegasus living side by side. Paired with the morning light and the gently falling flowers, I don't think anything could top how quaint and ethereal this sight was. I grabbed Seraphina and got her ready to go for a ride. I was hoping to get some bees for wax so that I could make candles, so we warmed up in the round pen before heading out, flying still not seeming to be on the table yet. We travelled quite far, hitting the sea and looting a village, finding some pretty cool horse tack up in a tower. I also worked to free all of the butterflies that I found in bottles. Day 33, we left, cantering over the lavender meadow, where I saw a herd of horses running. That spooked me a little, as usually the vanilla horses don't really move all that much. Maybe there was something in the grass, like a snake, and I didn't have much choice but to hope Seraphina didn't step on anything. I harvested more pretty leaves for decoration and avoided scaly flying predators as best as I could. Just as the sun was setting, I found a beehive, managing to locate the tiny buzzing insects by sound. They were especially small because they were from the Dragon's Livestock mod, I think. We got home long after the sun had set, and after taking a big drink, Seraphina and her pasture mate settled down for the night. I placed down a beehive in a more flowery and overgrown section of the island, and the bees made it their home pretty quickly. Day 34, I had been doing some decorating overnight, and that included overhauling the leaves on all the roofs with a new range of colours and textures. They were looking overgrown, cottagecore, and magical. I also thought that it looked quite natural and realistic despite the crazy fantasy colours. I was planting saplings all over the island, dotting them around every nook and cranny to bring the whole island together. They also helped obscure the view of dragons in the distance, which did wonders for my anxiety of being randomly attacked. Plus, since there were no interesting mountains or forests beyond the moat, it gave the place a more mystical backdrop and made it feel more disconnected from the rest of the land. With the horses grazing at sunset, I spent time crafting a bunch of stuff for the tack and feed room. I'm talking saddle racks, bridle racks, feed bins, counters, you name it. I had to get creative with the layout as I had a lot of wall space, but not so much floor space, so things were about to get vertical. Day 35, I discovered that the doors let in a heart-shaped light beam into the tack room, and I think from now on, these are my favourite types of doors. How ridiculously cute is that? The bottom floor of the tower is comprised of a feed station, which is a sink and matching pink countertops, and above is a shelf that holds up 4 pastel buckets. Across from that are 3 multicolored bins that hold sweet feed and rose feed, which is used for breeding. I wasn't sure what would happen if I bred unicorns and pegasi, but I would have to try that out later. Upstairs is where I put the tack section, as I had more room up here. I utilised the wall as best as I could, stacking saddle and bridle racks with a pastel tack box underneath. It needed more decoration, but I was happy with the layout. I got to admire my house from afar and discovered that the stables were teeming with butterflies. I'm not sure where they had come from, but they were hanging out in all the hedges and walls. I hope they were enjoying the sun and plants and and maybe they would stay a while. I've spent a significant amount of time building and crafting and planning, so I'm itching for an adventure. Solace is my mount of choice, and I thoroughly groom him before his gear goes on. Seraphina doesn't even bother to look up from her grazing to see us off. I decide to have a quick look by the mountain plateau, just in case Solace was pointing something out all of those days ago. We ride through the destroyed village and up the plateau, not really seeing anything of interest. I figure I could get a really good look around at the very top of the hill, and Solace dutifully climbs all the way up. I spot the black dragon by the village, who looks as menacing as ever, and my island definitely stands out in the distance with its bright pinks and purples, plus the big tower above the stables. I make sure to look all around the perimeter, honing in on points of interest and observing the biomes. I was also trying to see if there were any animals or equines in need of help, but I couldn't really tell from all the way up here. I didn't feel very confident traveling to unknown places in the dark, so Solace and I hunkered down on the mountain. Day 36, we made our way down and headed into a forest. The outskirts were marshy, and Solace had to wade through and even swim at certain points. I was alarmed to spot a crocodile. That was not something I was expecting in a forest, and added a layer of danger as they could grab you from the back of your horse. I made sure to keep my pace steady and my eyes on the ground, trying my best to keep us both out of danger. Then Solace begins to behave strangely. He lowers his head, almost as if he is injured, and I panic, turning him away. I realize his head only lowers when looking in a particular direction, and this is obviously very confusing. I do some more tests and find that when I move away from a certain part of the forest, he's fine again. That means that something in the depths is affecting him. Once I was sure he wasn't actually hurt, I intend to use him as a detector to find whatever it was that was causing this. We get a little further in and I spot another crocodile. I'm not about to tango with this thing, so I start to go around when I spot a single purple wing sticking out from the bushes. I hop off Solace to go investigate, and I had to climb some leaves to see, but I discovered another Pegasus tangled in the brush. Their name was Nike and they were a mare. I realized the leaves were stopping her from flying away, and there was a hungry crocodile waiting nearby should she manage to break free. My best guess was that this winged horse had crash landed in the bush, maybe after taking damage to her wings while in flight, and she could not escape the mass of leaves and branches. Just outside, a predator snarled, causing her to panic and flail, draining her energy very quickly, leaving her more vulnerable than before. The poor girl had no flight left and had probably been struggling for a while. The sun was setting now, and I had no choice but to work in the dark, hacking away at the shrubs as quickly as possible. The crocodile growled hungrily, smelling its prey nearby, and I had to go further into the bush to grab the weak mare. I pulled her out, and once we were free of the branches, I grabbed Solace and we booked it up the mountain in the dark, away from hungry waiting jaws. And when we were a safe distance away, Nike collapses to the ground, and strangely, so does Solace. And this is strange because Solace has a bridle on, and swem horses can't sleep while wearing one. It was almost as if Solace was just as exhausted as our new mare Nike, despite not having been trapped in a bush for goodness knows how long. Solace even inched closer to her while on the ground, almost as if he was enchanted by her presence. At the time, I didn't think much of it, so I laid out my sleeping bag and drifted off. Day 37, both horses woke at first light, and I mounted Solace while ponying Nike. Oh, how the circle continues. It was not long ago that Solace had first been rescued and was ponied by Seraphina, and now it was his turn to bring a horse back home. There were a few weird things I noticed while we travelled. Firstly, Solace was acting strangely. He was harder to ride and wouldn't really listen when I asked him to change gait, instead staying in the same gait but just moving faster. Then when Nike took a moment to graze, so did Solace, despite me sitting on him and his bridle being on his face. But eventually, we were back at the island where Solace was untacked and deposited into the paddock with Seraphina, and Nike was brought into the round pen. Here she had plenty of grass and water to enjoy, but she had no interest. Instead, she walked up to the side of the round pen, practically shoving her head into the bush. I soon realised she was looking at Solace. Maybe she had just become attached to him as he was there when we rescued her. I gave her a brush and made sure her water was topped up, then admired her for a moment. She was a solid deep bay with massive pink wings, green eyes and a few socks. I did wonder if maybe she would fly at some point, as Seraphina had been showing no interest. Something was bothering me though. Solace was acting strangely ever since we picked Nike up, and I pillared up to look over the two pastures. Considering they were quite close together, I could turn to see both horses. I looked back and forth between the two, hoping something would jump out at me and explain why things felt so weird. Then it happened. By chance, the sun was setting and the light cast a shadow of Solace onto the ground, and that's when I realised his shadow was doing things that he wasn't. At first, I thought the shadow was maybe some kind of ghost or being that was following him, but as the shadow grazed, the grass disappeared from beneath Solace's head. His shadow was actually the true Solace. Then his body stuck a neck down to eat, and I looked back to Nike to see she had also put her head down to graze, and I realised Solace had been put under Nike's spell, and his body was cursed to follow her every move. This was not only freaky, but incredibly concerning. Solace's shadow had revealed his true spirit, so it was against his will that he mirrored the Pegasus. I didn't know what to do, so I tried to separate Solace. Maybe if he was out of her spell's range, then he wouldn't be affected. Suddenly, the way he was behaving in the forest made sense. When he got close to her in the bush, she was projecting her weakness onto him, which is why he dropped his head. Same thing explains why he lay down to sleep despite wearing a bridle. I brought him around the island, hoping it was far enough, but that proved to be futile. He was still under her spell. It was only when I dragged him out into the moat that he was able to break free and begin swimming. Darkness was upon us, and I couldn't just leave him in the moat, so I brought him to the furthest bit of land on the island from the stables, and while he scratched his leg, I couldn't see Nike from here, so I wasn't sure if it was her or not. To determine if he was out of range, I grabbed a pom-pom and waved it around. Thankfully, he reared up, something Nike wouldn't have done as she couldn't see the pom-pom. So I know that this area is safe. Unfortunately, it's late and Solace is tired, so he plops down to sleep, and later on it even begins to rain. I have no choice though. I begin to sculpt the land so that I can put a small paddock here. That way he can be safely away from her spell and also freely move around. I threw down some leaves and slabs, securing a square for him before bringing him inside. I had to put a bridle on him to get him to stand up, and as we got closer to the gate of the new paddock, he suddenly collapsed. I knew it was because we were in range of Nike, and while I would usually just let a horse sleep, this was unnatural, so I had to drag him through the gates where he suddenly stood back up. Cows had gathered inside the paddock while I was building it, and I figured they could keep Solace company for now. Day 38, I headed back to the stables to bring Seraphina and Nike inside and out of the rain. Spinning llama break. Checking on Solace, he seemed to be doing much better, and I wish I had time to build him a quick shelter, but he didn't really look like the rain bothered him. Nike was given a lilac halter, and a bolt of lightning struck behind her. I couldn't help but feel like she was a more powerful Pegasus than I had first assumed. The bison ran straight up to me after leaving her pen, which freaked me out as usual, but the big guy was starting to grow on me. And off he goes. Day 39, I added more decor to the stable tower, and the feed floor was looking very homey and well loved. The kitchen station was my personal favourite because it had a distinct horsiness about it while still being very cute and whimsical. The upstairs tack section needed more work, but I would get to that as soon as I could. Day 40, I finally got to decorating my house, focusing on 3 main rooms: a bedroom, a kitchen, and a living room. It was dark when I finally finished, and I was in love with the bedroom and the kitchen. They both had magical, crystal lover vibes, while also looking homey and warm. I wasn't in love with the living room though. That definitely needed more pizzazz, but I was a little burnt out from all the decorating. Day 41, I took care of all of the horses, including Nike, who was getting familiar with Seraphina without having to share a paddock space. I decided to see if Nike had retracted her spell on Solace, so I brought her over to his paddock, where I watched both very carefully. He wasn't mirroring her anymore, which meant she was no longer enchanting him. Maybe she had put a spell on Solace to try and get help when she was stuck in the bush, and had since realized she was safe and no longer needed to have him under her control. This made me so relieved, and Solace could come back over to the stables now that he wasn't in danger. After bringing Nike over to the pen, I borrowed some of Seraphina's purple tack to put on Nike. Since it was cloth and bitless, I figured it would be the easiest for her to handle. She was actually pretty calm about it and let me put on the bareback saddle, girth, and breastplate. I was pleased with her reaction, or lack thereof, and we went for a walk around the round pen to ensure she was used to the feeling of the fabric on her body. When we finished our training session, I put her back in the stables, the pink one, and brought Seraphina and Solace back into the paddock, reunited at last. Day 42, I continued my training with Nike, and since she was progressing so quickly, I couldn't help but have a sit on her once it was clear she'd accept that. Inside the round pen, I admired her wings, much like I did with Seraphina, but I had no idea what was about to happen next. We were just walking around the pen, and I thought I'd asked her for a trot. But suddenly I was thrown back and up into the air, and I realized we were flying. Nike felt strong and bold in her flying. We went super high, at least it felt super high, and she soared over the stables. I didn't know how to steer, but I assumed leaning my weight would shift her in flight, and thank goodness I was correct. It wasn't pretty or smooth, but I managed to stay on, and we landed not long after taking off. I was so thrilled that we got to fly together, but I couldn't help but wonder, why had Seraphina never flown? Did her wings not work properly? Or was it that she was scared of flying? Either way, I would have to look into it at some point. After a very successful day of accidentally flying, Nike was turned out with Seraphina and Solace, and they didn't seem too fussed by the new addition. Solace had clearly forgiven Nike for the enchantment too. Now there were 3 mythical creatures to care for, 1 unicorn and 2 Pegasi. So far, every horse had been wonderful to handle. I was lucky they allowed me to care for them enough that they chose to stay on the island. I was sure that if they really wanted to, they could totally bust out of the pasture and the stables, but they were clearly pretty comfortable here. Day 43, I was back on Nike, riding around the island, trying my best to figure out what the buttons and cues were. We managed to get a steady trot, but when I asked for canter, we were off the ground again. I would have to learn how to actually ask her for flight, and the difference between that and an increase in gait before we could go off on any adventures, so we certainly had more training days ahead of us. I do wish we had a track or arena to do this in, as at the moment I was just going wherever there was space. I did get to the point where I could switch gates without flying by accident, and I was learning how sensitive she was to cues and commands. At one point though, I must have done something wrong, and she reared up, immediately taking off to the skies. The poor girl was trying her best, and I cannot fault her for that. After returning her to the paddock, I built up some cross ties in the space between the stables and pasture. That way I could tack up horses without them wiggling around. That evening, I also crafted a bunch of swem items, including a horse whistle. I did not know what it did, but I tried to use it on Nike. She wasn't very interested in getting up from her slumber though. Day 44, I poo-pick all the stables and paddocks before bringing Seraphina out for a ride. She stood dutifully in the cross ties while I got her ready, and soon we were moving around the island. She didn't seem to have the same buttons as Nike did, and she never faltered when changing gates. She never reared or bucked, and while the ride itself was uneventful and pleasant, I was hoping that I could get her to take to the skies, but just like before, she showed no interest, her wings simply an accessory rather than a tool. Later that day, the bison got stuck in the wash stall, so I had to drag him out, and that evening I dotted a few lampposts along the paths to help lighten them up. Day 45, I decide I'm not going to train horses by just riding them willy-nilly. I need a dedicated space for it. As there is limited land on the island, my goal is to get Nike to fly up so that I can scout out the space next to the moat and see if I can make something out there. Nike is groomed and tacked up in the wash stall, and after a quick warm-up, I try to ask her to fly from a standing start for the first time. To my surprise, she immediately responds, launching herself up into the air and beating her huge lilac wings. I am absolutely terrible at controlling her, but thankfully there are no obstacles up here for us to collide with. Eventually, I managed to get a good gander at the shrubland below, and I can see that despite being littered with bushes and stumps, the land is relatively flat and plentiful. We return to the stables and Nike is untacked, then I swim across the moat armed with shovels and axes. I start to clear the land, aiming to give myself as much room as I could possibly want for a racetrack arena combo. This took much more time than expected, and if you're enjoying the video so far, please consider checking out pinehavenponies.co.uk. We have loads of model horses for sale, including Breya and Schleich, and they're all discounted to celebrate 2026, the year of the horse. We ship all over the world, so come check us out if you love horses and ponies. The entire rest of the day, and day 46 and 47, was spent prepping the land for building. Day 48, I had the most difficult bit done, the curve of the track. I didn't use any references for this, I'm just going off of vibes, and while it's not the smoothest curve and bend you'll ever see, it would more than suffice. I filled in the straights of the track, both inside and the outside, the bottom of the fence being leaves, and the top being oak slabs. This design was not realistic, but it was simple to build and worked well with the theme. It is raining, but here is the finished track. I figured this space inside would be perfect for a long arena. I would keep the ground as grass, mostly because I couldn't be bothered to go get more sand right now. I think I did pretty well, all things considered. Once that's done, I swim home and work on bringing all the horses inside and away from the rain. This does remind me that I need to make some pasture blankets so that when all 3 horses are safe and warm inside their stalls, I craft a full set of rugs. Day 49, I gently place the blankets on the sleeping horses, colour coordinating them with their assigned colours. Even though Nike is more lilac than pink, I still think the pastel rose rug suits her better than the purple one. What do you think? Since it's wet and dreary, I didn't want to make any of the horses work outside today, so I take the opportunity to build a bridge from the island and across to the racetrack. Now I do get bold with this, not looking at any tutorials or references, just going freehand. My design is made up of oak logs for supports and slabs that extend out by 5 blocks before going up half a block. I do try and do both sides simultaneously, as I don't know where the middle of the bridge will be. Once it's connected, I have a look from the side and Yep, that's one skinny bridge, but luckily it doesn't look too strange height-wise. So by buffing it up with stairs and adding more log supports, it comes to this on day 50. Getting better, but it's not quite there yet. So I put in some railings, doing the best I can considering the awkwardness of the gentle incline for the fences. Then I put in some oak leaves to really tie the look together, and bam! Bridge! Not too shabby. The more I practice, the better I get. If you're a builder on Minecraft, I'd love to know what you thought of my bridge attempt. Finally, I copied the lamppost design I did on the island all along the railings so that I can travel across it even in the dead of night. Day 51, I see the finished bridge in daylight and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The rain has let up now, so it's time for me to head to the stables and derug, groom and turn out all of the equines. Well, except for Solace, who gets cross-tied. Nike and Seraphina are very interested in what's happening, so much so they forego grazing to stare at him over the gate. Solace then somehow manages to turn around in the cross ties, and I get him to face the front before tacking up. Today I was going to test the bridge and the racetrack. I had been giving a lot of attention to the two Pegasi, and I'm sure Solace would appreciate the leg stretch after a few days cooped up in the stables thanks to the rain. First stop, the bridge. Solace shows no fear and crosses without complaint. I'm super happy with the width and stability of the structure, and I reckon that even the most skittish horse would have no problem going across. We reach the track without even getting a drop of water on us, and I close both gates for safety. First, we simply trot around, and once I'm sure that the bend isn't too extreme, we pick up a canter. Solace is steady and reliable, listening to my cues and signals. I do have a question though. We were riding the track anti-clockwise. On a real racetrack, do you have to ride it in a certain direction, or is it at the discretion of the location? Solace is ready to go, and I let him fly into the extended canter. We complete a few laps, his hooves thundering steadily across the grass, and I'm pretty darn satisfied with my work over the last few days, and this has really opened up more training opportunities for the horses. At day's end, we disembark from the track and make our way back over the bridge, and with the sunset streaming into our eyes, we make it home. Not a bad day. Solace gets turned out with the two girls, and before I go to bed, I make sure to muck out their stalls, as they had been locked inside for the last few days, producing a few piles of poop. All the gates are closed, poop deposited into the wheelbarrow, and the pitchfork returned before I flop down into my own bed. Day 52 is much like the day before, but this time we focus on Seraphina. My goal is to help her fly, although I don't really know how to do that. I'm still completely stumped as to why Nike can fly, but she can't. Her wings seem to function fine on the ground, waving as she walked and curling around herself when she slept, but she almost never tried to flap them in order to take off. We ride over the bridge with no issue, heading into the center of the track where I want the arena to be. I have brought a measuring stick and some dirt, setting up a few ground poles and very small jumps. She trots the poles beautifully for me and even pops over the jump without hesitation. But soon that changes, almost like she catches on to what I'm trying to do, and she starts refusing every single jump. I'm getting a little frustrated. I am trying to help her, but it seems she is totally adverse to the idea of flying. Until I realized that even when she refuses a jump, I was actually still helping. It's much clearer in third person. When she bucks or rears, she would actually flap her wings in annoyance. It was a small thing, but maybe, just maybe, the more she beat her wings on the ground, the stronger she would become. With this new realization, we called it a day, and she was returned to the pasture where she lay down, exhausted after a day of exercise. In the night, I set up a new course, this one prioritizing jumps and turns, both of which might just help Seraphina to get more confident and powerful. Day 53, I do a little showcase of the place so far, and the progress of this little island is just astounding. I think you'd agree with me that our fantasy rescue is looking fantastic, fitting the theme so well and being our own little magical island of peace. I opted to let the horses have a rest day, focusing instead on decorating my porch. I go for a gardener's dream, adding potted plants, hanging baskets, and all sorts of flowers. When I'm done, the front of my house is looking ridiculously pretty and quaint, and I aspire to one day have a porch that is so full of life and love. I also added a new patch of farmland right next to the house, wanting to grow some carrots and wheat, as the current tilled patch was still occupied by horse feed, putting down some leaves to border the new garden and berry bushes in the middle. Day 54, I redid my living room and it looks so much better with a moss carpet and a few cutesy decor items. Today I want to take to the skies with Nike because I have a super cool idea of making a flight course up in the sky. My plan was to make rings that we could fly through to improve my steering and confidence while flying. We hovered over the track and tried to figure out how high I would need to go with the training rings. Once I was sure, we went for a little glide to get comfortable. I say we, I mean for me to get more comfortable. While we're in the sky, something below caught my attention. A patch on the ground filled with white, and looking closer I could see they were spider webs. I could also see a body, pink and white, maybe some sort of deer, right in the center of the webs. We landed to get a closer look, and I was careful to avoid all of the cobwebs. I could see spider eggs here too, which told me this was a nest of some kind, and while the mother wasn't here right now, they could return at any time. To make things worse, a dragon loomed in the distance, and I just hoped they couldn't see us. In the center of a ditch, absolutely swimming in sticky cobwebs, was a mystical equine being. It had the body of a swem horse, colored in pink and white gradient, but had horns like a stag. I didn't have time to figure out what this creature was, and I bust out my sword, hacking away at the webs and dragging them out until they were free from the prison. I ground tied them to get a closer look, and I noticed that despite not having a name, they had a braided mane. Perhaps it was braided magically? Or maybe the pixies were behind the immaculate hairstyle. Their horns were magnificent. I don't know if they were classified as a unicorn or something else. They also had feathers like Solace did, so maybe feathered feet was a unicorn family trait. This horse probably couldn't fly, so Nike ponied them home and we carefully picked our way over the terrain, not moving too quickly. I was pleased we could use the bridge to get across instead of having to drag the rescue into the water like I had to do with the other horses. The creature was quiet, clearly in pretty decent health. I reckon they hadn't been caught long, but had they remained in the pit, they may have turned into some spider's lunch. We headed back to the stables, straight to the quarantine pen for the new rescue. Nike was a good support today, and she was turned out in the late evening. Before going to bed, I checked in on the new horse, and they had made themselves comfortable, snoozing softly at the back of the pen. Day 55, I got the new rescue a green halter, and I thought it would suit them pretty well, so they would also be assigned the green stable. When I approached and slipped the halter over their head, they freaked out, rearing up in panic. That was totally my fault. I hadn't spent any time bonding with them or gentling them, and I had just assumed that they would be as easy as the other horses had been. Luckily, they only reared once, and I had a hunch it wasn't the halter that bothered them, but rather the action of putting it on. If the halter was the problem, they would still be rearing and bucking, trying to get it off of their face. Seraphina is tacked up for a little training session. This time we focused on stamina and sprints rather than jumping, as I was hoping to save that for when we had a full day available. Day 56, I had crafted 2 full sets of tack for the new horse. I know, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, but I couldn't help it. The mint green was so cute. Not only did I make a bitless and bareback cloth set, but also an adventure set, but I would most likely not get to use that for a while. I got Nike prepared for the day out, and after one last good look around from the air, we landed and I started to pillar up to build some training rings. My material of choice was the rainbow glass, as it had quickly become my favorite block in the whole wide world. Building was tricky up here, but with some guesswork and dirt to climb up, I created generally spherical rings up in the sky that I was pretty sure that we could fit through. Of course, I had to test it out to be sure, so after descending down carefully, I hopped onto Nike's back and we soared up towards the ring. I, of course, had no skill in judging the proper angle of entry and promptly whacked my head as we went through, but I was certain that with some practice, both my steed and I could travel through the ring without touching it. It also wasn't ridiculously wide that there was no challenge. I couldn't help but try to thread the needle a few times just to see how good I could get. Soon it was dark and Nike and I returned to the stables, but my night was far from over. I returned to the field, building more rings and creating somewhat of a course. I was sort of just dotting them around at varying heights, hoping it would be rideable. Or flyable. When I was done, the rings were lit up and looking pretty darn good. I was so excited to get to ride it. I had full intentions of grabbing Nike and practicing on day 57, but the weather had other plans. I had to bring everyone in and rug them, feeling like it wouldn't be fair to force Nike to stay out in the rain. Even the new rescue was brought inside, and they were Solace's stable neighbor. Wait, neighbor. That was close. I almost didn't get to make that pun in this video. They were very unhappy at having to wear a pasture blanket, but once it was on, they settled down. The stables had an air of peace while the rain pitter-pattered down, and I hoped I was doing a good job of caring for and rehabilitating these beautiful creatures. As there wasn't much horsing around for me to do, see I'm on a roll now, I decorated the tack room, adding in a little hangout area, complete with a yellow sofa, moss carpet, hedge plant, bulletin board, shelf, and the cutest shelf decorations. I do enjoy adding community or chill out areas to tack rooms. It always reminds me of the Saddle Club. Once that was done, I did a quick sweep of poo picking, then headed to the bridge to do a bit of fishing. I quite enjoy how calm fishing can be in Minecraft, and you never know what goodies you're gonna find. Day 58, the horses were turned out again as the rain had cleared, and it was looking like a nice day. The new rescue was returned to the round pen, mostly because I felt the paddock wasn't really big enough for 4 horses, and I didn't want overcrowding to cause any issues. Solace was my mount of choice. I wanted to cross the moat and go into the village. I had intended to fix it up after the dragon attack, and I was going to. That was until I heard a meow coming from inside a building. Inside the little workshop hut was a fluffy white cat. I thought they might be a Siamese, but those are a short-haired breed, so I'm not entirely sure what kind of cat this is. Luckily, I still had fish on me from last night, and the cat slinked over while I was holding the tasty snack. With only one slice of salmon, the kitty was bonded with me. I didn't know it at the time, but this was a girl, and I brought her back to the island, abandoning my restoration plans. The kitty explored her new home, and I decided it was time I named both the new cat and the new rescue. For the horse, I asked my Instagram followers for suggestions. If you want a chance to be featured in these videos, you can follow me on Instagram, I'm at Abigail Pinehaven, and keep an eye out on my stories because that's where I'll post the name suggestion boxes. The name Sakura popped up a couple of times, and I thought it suited the mare pretty well. I chose the name Khaleesi for the cat, you know, dragon lady. I also decided to give the bison a name, and I thought Wild Wings was pretty funny. I know he's a bison, not a buffalo, but I think the joke kind of works anyway. In the dark, I built a new paddock. This time it was down from where the farm was. I felt the paddock I had made for Solace while he was under Nike's spell was a little far away and isolated, so this pasture would feel a bit more connected with the other horse facilities. Day 59, the rain was back, but I got around it by equipping all of the horses with rugs that would help keep them warm and dry. Sakura still did not like getting anything placed on her, lashing out when the rug was thrown over her back. I decided she was long overdue to leave the quarantine pen, so she was moved to the new paddock. I reckon it could fit at least 2 horses, and I didn't like having equines by themselves. Horses are herd animals and need a pasture mate at the very least. Since Solace was a unicorn and Sakura was unicorn adjacent, I thought maybe they would get on together. First, Solace was introduced over the fence. He was accustomed to doing so by now. The mare showed very little interest, having already shared a stable divider with the unicorn. Solace was a little more curious once he was inside, approaching her with small steps. Maybe he was just as perplexed as I was about what exactly she was. We had been having an unusual number of rainy days recently, and I figured building another bridge would help pass the time. Day 60, it was done, and despite being smaller than the bridge to the racetrack, I actually think this one is way cuter. Now I had 2 entry points to the island, and 1 bridge led to the village, which was quite handy. As it was finally clear, Seraphina and I hit the arena with more training. She seemed happier to actually jump today, and her wings would still flap when she took off, so I was pleased that she was making progress. I was sure if we kept at it, we'd be able to start flying. Day 61, my focus was on Sakura, trying to help her through the freak-out phase whenever she was tacked up. My goal was to show her that wearing a blanket or halter was a good thing, and I let her graze right after so she didn't associate tacking up with change. Day 62, we continued this process, and she was still bucking at the introduction of a blanket, but I soon left her to graze, grabbing Seraphina for more strength training. We literally worked all day, and I was really proud of her for sticking at it, even when she got a little frustrated. I think she was starting to feel stronger and more confident, and I hoped one day she would just choose to fly on her own. Day 63, I was looking in the overgrowth for Khaleesi, the cat, as I hadn't seen her in a few days. I was pretty sure she wouldn't have swam off the island, and it did take a little while, but eventually she popped out of a bush. I didn't want to lock her in the house, and the island was perfectly safe. I just wanted to make sure she was alright. Seraphina got cross-tied and tacked, and I left her there to do a quick session with Sakura. Pretty much rinse and repeating the stuff we were doing before. She hadn't made too much progress just yet, but I'm sure she'd start to mellow out soon. Another full day of jumping awaited Seraphina and I. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but I couldn't help feel that we were so close to takeoff now, and she just needed an extra bit of confidence and maybe a push. That was until we actually started, and she was in a really bad mood. She hadn't been keen on doing anything I asked of her. Maybe she actually needed the day off since we've been working so hard recently. After warming up, she did start to offer bigger leaps, but I promised she would have the day off tomorrow to recoup. That night, I put my time to good use by building an enchanting building. I would need good armor and weapons if I was going to take on a mother dragon, which is something I would need to do if I wanted my very own baby dragon. Mother dragons dropped an egg, and from this egg the baby could be hatched and it would immediately be tame and bonded to you. But I would stand no chance against this giant beast if I didn't have decent gear, and in the morning of day 64, the pretty little enchanting room was done. I went a little crazy with the decoration. I just wanted it to feel magical and mystical, so I put in loads of moons and stars, potion bottles, and books. Then I headed to the stables just as the rain started again. Are we in the tropics or something? Why does it rain so often? Anyway, it seemed pretty warm and light at the moment, so Sakura got some more training in. After a few bucks and kicks, she finally accepted the blanket without lashing out. Oh my goodness, I am so glad we got through that. I immediately ended the session as soon as she gave me the reaction I wanted, and I brought her into the stall and out of the rain. All of the other horses were also brought inside, and I pottered around my gorgeous island for the rest of the day. Day 65, the rain had cleared, leaving behind a rainbow. At first, I was kind of sick of having to bring the horses in and out. That was until I rediscovered the horse whistle. I blew it, and Nike, who it was bound to, came literally running up to me. Oh my goodness, that is so cool. Honestly, I have been playing with this mod for years, and I don't think I've ever used this feature. How cool is that? Maybe if I made a bunch of whistles, I could just call all of the horses to their pastures rather than having to hand turn them out every single time. I tried it on Solace and Sakura, discovering the limitations of the whistle. Horses take a direct path to you, and if there's something in their way, they just stop, not being able to figure out how to go around. So I needed to make sure they could go straight to me without getting blocked. Once I had that figured out, both horses came running, and I was absolutely giddy watching them come right up to me. I freaking love the horse whistles. That night, I descend into the earth to mine up some obsidian. I'm hoping to make a nether portal so that I can get netherite, and by mining quartz, I'll also get lots of XP for enchanting. Day 66, while still underground, I was just mining in caves, minding my own business. This is when I discover an enormous cave, but something is off about it. There is no glow lichen, no water, and no way for me to see more than a few meters in front of me. But there were ores here, and I wasn't going to say no to diamonds. By the time I found my first chest next to a pile of gold, it was too late. Had the death screen not told me what caused my demise, I probably wouldn't have known. It was so dark down there, I didn't even get to see the dragon that killed me. Despite this, I knew it was likely a mother dragon, as they dwelled underground. Now I had to go back and retrieve all of my stuff, and I didn't think much of it at the time, so I brazenly travelled to my death waypoint, intending to dig down and grab my grave. That also meant I was not at all paying attention to being sneaky, and luck would have it that the black dragon who intimidated me all those days ago had finally seen me. This was the first time I was the direct target of a dragon's wrath, and by God, they were strong. It didn't help as well that I was practically nude. All of my armor and weapons were well below the earth, probably being guarded by the mother dragon. I had no choice but to try again, this time being far quieter when approaching my target. The black dragon had landed, clearly satisfied that I had been eradicated. I quickly dug a hole and got away from the beast, towards the bigger beast. I wish this part was more interesting, but unfortunately it was so dark that when I died, which I did multiple times, you pretty much couldn't see anything anyway. It took a few goes to get my stuff back, but once I was in the clear, I had no intention of ever getting close to that dragon until I was armed to the teeth. Day 67, I made an enchantment table and tried to unwind by flying with Nike. It gave me time to plan while we soared through the rings, and I thought about the time I fought the Ender Dragon on horseback. There was no chance I would ever bring a swem horse to a dragon battle in this world. There was way too high a chance they would get seriously injured or even killed by the fire or ice dragons would shoot at me. But that doesn't mean my Pegasi couldn't aid in something dragon related, I just needed to figure out what was safe enough. Day 68 and 69, my plan was to pick a fight with a dragon in order to get more XP for enchanting. I left all the animals at home. This was going to be super dangerous and I had to do it alone. My target? The Black Dragon. He was clearly a nasty thing, choosing to pick on creatures weaker than themselves. I would have to take them down for sure. The fight took so long that the sun set, then it was mostly just me swinging wildly while choking down golden apples to keep my health up, all the while I was being set on fire. But I was persistent. That was something the dragon was not prepared for. I would not run, and neither would he, and eventually, I struck the mighty beast down. He did not drop a single bit of XP. Bro, are you kidding me? I did all of that for no experience whatsoever. I mean, I'm glad the skies are a little safer now, but my goodness, that took a ridiculous amount of time for very little reward. Day 70, I pivoted back to the Nether plan, building a portal and spending the next 3 days exploring the strangeness of this other world. There were new biomes to discover, some looking magical and inviting, and others being uncomfortably fleshy and weird. I focused on quartz for XP, gold for my apples, and netherite for armor. Day 73, I got home and immediately began chanting everything I owned, hoping to give myself a fighting chance against the mother dragon. Day 74, I found Nike and Seraphina snuggled up together asleep. I was glad the two Pegasi had come to love each other, despite them being so different. Unfortunately, once the pair were up and awake, I had to take Nike out to the cross ties. I was intending to do some free flying today, wanting to see if I could spot any more rescues from the skies. Very, very, very bad mistake. I had clearly angered the dragons when I killed another one of their own, and we were so easy to spot in the air. With Nike's huge beating wings and no trees to hide behind, a red dragon spotted us and went in for the attack. I had no time to think of a plan. I had to figure out if Nike was quicker than the dragon or if it would eventually catch us. I realized we could turn quicker than the beast, but that meant getting far too close to the outstretched claws. We tried to dodge and weave, doing anything to lose it. I was putting a lot of faith in Nike's ability to fly and my own ability to guide her as we went for the nosedive, pulling up at the last moment, hoping the dragon would slam into the ground. In our fleeing, I had accidentally run straight into the field, teeming with more dragons who flew up to join the hunt. I now had not 1, not 2, but 3 dragons on my tail, and no idea how to lose them. I quickly weighed my options. If I jumped off Nike, they would probably stop chasing her, but if I died, they may just turn around and attack her anyway, and I would be too far away to save her. She was doing the best she could, listening to my every turn and dip without question, and I'd rather die than leave her to the dragons. They were terrifying, bunching off behind us with their claws outstretched, ready to pluck us from the sky. I was just thankful that they weren't breathing fire at us yet. I didn't know what to do, and at some point Nike would tire and they would catch us, I was sure of it. Yet another dragon leapt into the air, but before it did, it threw out a breath of fire that caught both Nike and I. Thankfully, Nike only takes damage initially, but I remain on fire and have to think quickly, grabbing my golden apples from my backpack to try and stay alive. I was running out of time. I tried to bait the dragons into landing so that we could gain a lead, but they couldn't be outsmarted. Then it came to me. The trees. The same forest I found Nike in was dense enough that the dragons would get caught on the trunks, and if I managed not to slam myself into any trees, maybe, just maybe, we had a shot at getting away. This was it. I had one shot. If we didn't make it, the dragons would catch us, and I was certain that that encounter would be fatal. Now I had to put my full faith in Nike and her in me as we flew straight towards the wall of wood. It worked! I couldn't believe it! Somehow we managed to thread the needle while the dragon slammed into the trees. We went deep into the forest and hid, just in case the dragons flew back up and searched for us. I watched the skies for a while, but nothing but bright blue stared back at me. We had done it. We were safe. I didn't intend to stay in this forest overnight, so once I was sure it was clear, Nike and I took off again, being very careful to avoid the pack of dragons we had left at the border. I didn't want to head straight home, fearing that if I led them back to the stables without realizing, there would be carnage that I couldn't run away from. I couldn't have asked for a better horse to be riding when we got caught in that nasty situation. Nike had trusted my every move. Even when she got hurt, she didn't let that get the better of her. I was so proud of us, and it turned out my fun little Skyring training was actually crucial to our survival. We flew along the coast, and I couldn't help glancing behind me to check for scaly monsters. I spotted a strange stone structure on the beach, and my confidence was through the roof, so we were going to go check it out. What's the chance it was a dragon cave anyway? The sun had begun setting when we drifted towards the ground. Tall dune grass did a pretty good job of hiding us from the sky, so that made me relax a little. Nike and I poked our head around the cave entrance, and it was immediately clear this was no dragon den. Sure, there were piles of gold and chests, but there was also torches and sheep, and what looked like some sort of workstation. Pretty certain it was safe, we entered, heading towards the brightly lit workbenches. From what I could see, there were these big bones, maybe even dragon bones, littered around the cave. I was so distracted that it took Nike staring for me to realize we were not alone. Behind a river of lava and chains was a winged horse. This creature was dark and held its head low, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little afraid. The cage was surrounded by lit candles. What if this horse cursed me like Nike put a spell on Solace? I studied them as best as I could in the low light and realized this was not a Pegasus, but an Alicorn. They had a curved horn on their head, and something told me this being was even more powerful than Nike. I suppose there would only be one way to find out. Nike settled in the cave, clearly exhausted from our chase earlier, not showing too much concern about the Alicorn. I worked on extinguishing the lava around them, and by the time I was done, they had curled up to sleep in the corner of their prison. The poor thing looked tired and defeated, so I broke the chains around the Alicorn, and they were still asleep, so I let them be, instead snooping around the cave. This mysterious person was clearly interested in studying creatures, and their workshop contained all sorts of books, scripts, and even live bottle butterflies, who I released, of course. They obviously thought the Alicorn was too dangerous to put in a simple pen, and based on the creature's appearance, I wouldn't be surprised if their will had been worn down by experiments. I found some tack in the chests, and wondered if they had tried to tame and ride the Alicorn to no success. Little did they know that unicorns and Pegasi alike needed fresh air, food, and love, and only then would they accept you. In the morning light, I waited for the alicorn to rise, then immediately caught them with the lead just in case they tried to run off. I could release them into the wild, but I wasn't convinced that out there was any safer than in here, and I wanted to at least bring them to the island to rest. We walked out into the sunlight, and I got a good look at them for the first time. I had initially thought their coat was black, but now I could see it was actually mostly blue with hints of purple. Their underbelly was white, and their wings boasted the full gradient. Their horn broke off into two ends, looking a little like a branch. I could see their name was Orion, and they were a stallion. This was a magnificent alicorn, so different to Nike and Seraphina respectively. Speaking of Nike, she clearly was not scared of him at all as she waltzed right over and nuzzled him. We started for home, keeping the pace steady and slow. Orion was not in very good condition, and any sorts of confrontation could be deadly, so we stayed out of sight as best we could. This turned out to be unnecessary, as every dragon nest we passed was empty. It seems that the dragons who had chased us yesterday were still caught in the trees. It was a pretty straight shot home. Orion followed behind quietly, but I was sure that was due to his condition rather than personality. He did not have access to food or water in that prison, and I had a feeling his magic was the only thing keeping him standing. When we arrived on the island via the new village bridge, I saw the two unicorns first, who were enjoying the grass at the back of their paddock, not giving us much attention. I suppose none of the horses knew that Nike and I had been chased by dragons yesterday, and it was business as usual for them. Orion was deposited into the quarantine pen, and I think he was thankful for the sun and quiet. He didn't begin eating though, so that was a little worrisome. Nike was reunited with Seraphina in the pasture, and I was fully intending to let Nike do whatever she wanted for the next few days. I checked back on Orion, who still wasn't eating or drinking. I decided the best thing to do was preemptively brew some health booster shots, as there was a good chance Orion needed one to recover. Day 76 started with my chores, which were taking longer and longer with each new horse. There was more poo to pick and water buckets to fill, but I didn't mind too much. Orion was still not improving, but he wasn't collapsing just yet. I worked with Sakura in the pasture, and she was now happy to wear a full set of tack. It was cloth tack, but that still counts. I even sat on her for the first time, nothing crazy, just a quick hop on, hop off moment. Then it was into the Pegasus pen to get Seraphina. I think Nike was a little bummed her pasture mate was leaving. I'm sure she just wanted to hang out with her all day, but Seraphina had been getting plenty of rest, and now it was back to training. At first it started as usual, using any opportunity to get her to flap her wings. Then it happened. She leapt over a jump, and as soon as her hooves touched the other side, she leapt again, flying up into the air. I was a little taken aback and unprepared, but after training on Nike, I had a pretty good flying seat. We didn't go high and didn't fly for long, but we were in the air, and that's all I wanted. Seraphina had finally beat her fear and flown, and I was so proud of her. I probably wouldn't be taking her to the open skies in case of dragons, but she would get to master flying in the safety of the island. As she had made such monumental progress, we ended the session there, and she returned to Nike. I was giddy, feeling a little hyper from the achievement that I made the spontaneous decision to breed some horses. Unfortunately, Orion didn't know either Pegasi mares very well, but Solace and Sakura had been sharing a paddock and got on very well. Grabbing 2 portions of rose feed, I hop-skipped over to the unicorn paddock and fed both residents the breeding feed. For a second, I wasn't sure it worked, but then they walked towards each other and Sakura was now pregnant. I genuinely had no idea what would pop out. I was a little concerned they would give birth to a normal horse, but I suppose we'd have to wait and see. Day 77, I whistled for Nike, who was in high spirits today. We took to the skies for more flight practice. Now that I knew how to trap dragons in the forest, I reckoned I could do it on purpose, this time with the goal of making the skies safer without having to fight every single dragon. Speaking of fighting a dragon, then, I suppose there was no point in holding off on battling the mother dragon. I had everything I needed, more golden apples that I could ever eat, and enchanted gear that would help limit the amount of damage she did to me. I decided I would bite the bullet and get it over with, so after finishing training with Nike, untacking her and turning her out into the paddock, I geared up and headed out, taking the same route I used to get my stuff back when she killed me a few days ago. Now I wish I had this epic battle, accompanied by music and cool shots, a real climactic fight for you to enjoy and savor. Unfortunately for both you and me, the fight with the mother dragon, one of the hardest dragons to beat, looked like this. And this went on for hours, just slashing and hacking, occasionally seeing a wing or a foot, constantly on fire, and yeah, I'll admit, I died a few times. So yeah, this sucked. I'm sorry, I really wish it didn't. By midday of day 78, the mother dragon fell, and just to stick it to me one more time, her body lay up high in the cavern, stuck on a tiny little ledge. I had to pillar up to finally lay her body to rest. I was a bit concerned that I didn't see the egg drop anywhere, and it was so hard to see I just started walking around hoping to find it. Then I saw a blue oval floating in the darkness. I thought this was a bit strange since I'm pretty sure the mother was a fire dragon, but maybe the eggs are just random colours. I trudged home and in pathetic fallacy, the rain came pouring down. If my fight had been more epic, maybe I would have felt sad for the mother dragon, but at this point I was just tired and fed up. Orion waited for me at his gate, still seeming downcast, and I made a note to give him the health boost soon. I figured out how to incubate the egg, dug a hole in my garden to place water, and inside the water the egg froze and began to wiggle. Now we wait. Day 79, I was so excited for my little baby dragon, but they had not hatched yet, so Seraphina and I hit the arena for more flight training. I added an extra jump to try and get her to really bounce off of the ground. She, however, was not impressed. She was used to the itty-bitty jumps with a long stretch of grass between them, but the new jump had short striding and was quite high. Refusal after refusal after refusal after refusal. This girl was so frustrated, she would buck and rear even when I asked her to change gaits. Finally, I took away the two smaller jumps to really encourage her to go for it. She refuses and then takes off into the air. I'm more prepared this time, holding her back and making her hover so she beats her wings rather than just gliding along. This will strengthen her more than anything we could do on the ground, and when we land, she's rewarded with being returned to the paddock to relax. Day 80, Orion had not improved, although I think he began trusting me, as I had started coming in and grooming him whenever I had a spare moment. This time I came armed with a health boost injection, and I just hoped it wouldn't hurt too much. The stallion didn't even flinch when I administered it, and he immediately went over to the hay net to eat. Clearly his appetite was back, so he would be able to start healing. If he didn't raise his head by tomorrow, I would give him another injection just to really buff out his health. I had intended to head out with Nike today, and I called her out of the pasture with the whistle. I had just begun to leave when I got the achievement, yay for baby horses, and I knew Sakura had given birth. I quickly tied Nike before sprinting to the unicorn paddock. There I found a tiny baby Palomino filly who was happy and healthy. I was a little sad she wasn't a unicorn, but then again, foals tended to have very few features, so maybe she would grow into one? I didn't have high hopes though. Now I am feeling pretty maternal. Not only do I have a baby dragon on the way, but there is now a precious foal in our care. I can't help but think about what would happen should a dragon descend upon our island, and I decide in that moment I would prevent that from happening as best as I could. And I knew just what to do to make the area safe. I mounted up on Nike, and before we left I let her get a look at the new filly, and I feel like she knew why we had to do this. We take off and fly straight towards the dragons. I spent most of this challenge trying my best to avoid them, stay out of sight and hide, but not this time. Now I was going to draw them to me, as many as I could, and Nike and I were going to lead them straight into the trees. They were still pretty scary, especially when they bunched up together like some kind of dragon rat king. I got a little nervous now. What if the first time we did it was a fluke? I couldn't risk losing Nike, I wouldn't know what to do without her. But it was too late to turn back now, and we had to commit. The dragons looming behind us wouldn't just let us walk away. We plunged, going too fast for me to really register where the trees were, and I just held on to Nike and hoped. She sped through quite far before a trunk brought us up short. Luckily, we took off too quickly for the fire to catch us. It was getting dark, but as we shot out of the trees, I could see the silhouettes of dragons behind us, but it seemed they weren't interested, with most tangled in the forest and some landing on the treetops to fight. I recall seeing a dragon's body tangled up in the trees as we went past, and I think that's many in close proximity, they turned their murderous attention to each other. Now, the skies near the island would be safer than they had ever been, and I was sure that I would never go into that forest again. I decided that Dragon's Death Forest was a fitting name for it. Despite our victory, I was still cautious, landing on an outcrop of the mountain plateau overlooking the island. All it would take is a single dragon to follow at a distance, putting the whole rescue in danger. It was late anyway, and after anxiously checking the skies, I noticed Nike was comfortable enough to sleep, and I decided I might as well settle down too. In the morning of day 81, I took a moment to have a look around. I don't know how I missed it, but a huge crevice stood behind us, littered with red and black skull and crossbone banners. I noticed there were also bones and skulls scattered around, clearly victims of this ravine. I didn't have to go in to see why this place was deadly. Wither roses. They not only did damage when they pricked you, but they left a wither effect that wore down your hearts for a few seconds. If you got caught in a wither rose patch, you were a goner. Then I remembered Solace staring at this mountain all those days ago. What if this was what he was looking at? What if there was a creature trapped inside? So I went to investigate. Eating a golden apple to buff up my health, I tried avoiding the killer flowers as best as I could. The ravine wasn't huge, but right at the back was a cave and something moved inside it. When I got closer, I realized this was an odd-looking horse. It reminded me a little of Sakura, but a horse nonetheless. It was clear the unicorn was trapped inside the cave. There were even untouched cobwebs that suggested they had been here a while. Without wings, they would have surely perished trying to leave the ravine. There was a chance they had fallen in here and then became unable to escape. I had to chop down the roses to clear a path for them to leave. They didn't have a name, so I couldn't tell what their gender was yet. After some coaxing, we finally exited the ravine, and I could see them properly in the daylight. Its hindquarters were red and had a bubble pattern on them, and this transitioned into pure black further up the body. They sported a red curved horn, a little like the one Orion had, double branch and all. They had a long, shaggy mane that started as red and changed to black at the tips. They were strangely beautiful, but very unusual in their looks. Even Nike was caught staring. Eventually though, she knew what she had to do as we ponied the new rescue back to the island, not having to cower or hide from dragons in the sky. We got in and immediately saw the filly sticking close to her mum in the unicorn paddock. The new rescue was led to the stables, but Orion still occupied the quarantine pen. Instead of moving him while he was still recovering, I stabled both Nike and Seraphina, freeing up the main paddock for our new rescue. I could have moved them or the Pegasi to the back paddock, but I wanted to keep an eye on the unicorn, and I rode the Pegasi far too often for them to be that far away. I also did not want to stable the new horse under any circumstances, as they had spent goodness knows how long in that dark, dank cave, and they deserved to see the sky and be able to walk freely. Day 82, I asked my Discord to name the new horse, who turned out to be a stallion. We had so many good suggestions, but I thought Julian/Ronnie's name of Redstone Eclipse was super cool, and I could call him Red as a barn name. You can join our Discord server, linked down below, and send photos of your horses, screenshots from games, chat about all things equine, and of course, give name suggestions when available. He still had a lowered headset, but he was eating and drinking, and I'm sure that in a day or two, his health would start to come back. Orion received his second health boost, and he really perked up this time. He started gulping down water and munching all the grass he could, so clearly he was on the up again. Checking in on the unicorns, it was clear those guys were living their best life with their new family member. Day 83 was just chores and letting everyone settle in. Orion was looking much better, and it was finally time to move him into the main paddock with the Pegasi, who I whistled in. Red was then moved into the quarantine pen, so he still had his own space. Day 84, on my routine checks, I did a double take at the unicorn paddock. Something looked off about Sakura, and I realised that was not Sakura, but rather her foal. They had grown into a unicorn, and I went over to have a closer look. Interestingly, she was almost a perfect blend of mum and dad. She was pink and white like Sakura, but inverted, with her front being pink and her rump being white. She had a straight horn like Solace, as well as a spiky mane, but in her own twist, there were hearts in her hair. She looked like if you made a unicorn into a sweetie. Or candy if you're American. As she was now an adult, it was time to wean her from mum and dad, so I put her into Sakura's stable, as she was still able to hear and see them, but would gain independence from the space. She was a little upset, gazing towards her parents behind the stall divider, but it would get easier with time. I suddenly remembered the dragon egg. I rushed over to the garden, where a tiny blue and white dragon stood atop ice. They were so cute! I could see some stats about them, and as I did that, I also accidentally discovered they could sit on my shoulder like a bird! Oh my goodness! Sorry, I'm so excited. I look powerful. A baby dragon sitting on my shoulder. I felt like I could conquer the world. They were a girl, so I settled on the name Istra. I felt it had femininity to it, while still being powerful and fantastical. I brought the baby girl inside and deposited her onto the bed, where she curled up to fall asleep. Why didn't I get a dragon egg sooner? This made the tedious battle 100% worth the effort. I totally would have let her sleep on the bed too, but I was a little worried about squishing her, so I plopped her onto the sofa where she continued happily snoozing. This day was awesome. Day 85, Istra was awake and hissing. But the hiss was super high-pitched, more cute than scary, a little like a kitten hissing. I decided that, as cool as it would be to have a full-grown dragon to ride and fly with, I already had a mount of choice with the Pegasi, and instead of having to accommodate a dragon that would have the ability to destroy buildings when fully grown, I chose to cook up a sickly dragon meal that would pause Istra's aging. I'm so sorry if you wanted to see me ride an adult dragon. Maybe we can do it next time. I carried the dragon around with me, showing her off to the Pegasi, but they weren't really fussed. I suppose a creature this small was of no threat and no interest to the horses. Solace was especially not a fan. I wondered if Istra would stay on my shoulders while riding a horse, and there was no one braver than Nike, so she was plucked from the pasture and readied. Turns out, you can ride a Pegasi with a baby dragon on your shoulder. Who knew? I had another fantastic idea. Let's show Istra what it feels like to fly. Nike took off gracefully and we soared around, the baby dragon feeling the wind on her scales and the ground get smaller and smaller as we climbed. I hope she was having fun because I certainly was. We didn't even bother crossing the bridge on foot, instead landing right next to the round pen. It soon began to rain and I hurried inside with Istra, not really knowing how the rain would affect her, so she could stay nice and dry in the house. Then I had to hustle and get all the horses inside stalls, or put rugs on them. We only had 5 stables and there were now 7 equines, so some of them would end up staying outside. Day 86, Istra didn't bother waking up, instead snoozing through the storm outside. This was no matter, as I had to care for all the horses anyway. In true Pinehaven rainy day fashion, I decided to build, this time not a bridge, but rather a landing pad. There wasn't really a clear justification for this, I just wanted a dedicated spot to take off and land in. I filled the pad with sand so there would be a soft landing, and even put up lights on the side so that I could see it at night. Day 87, I undid all of my raining prep, taking off all the rugs and turning out the horses that I had stalled. I decided that Red and Sakura's daughter could share the paddock behind the house. See, this is the dilemma I always have with these challenges. At some point, I just have too many horses to focus on, and some of them kind of get sidelined like Red did. Do you think I should try and limit my rescue numbers to give everyone equal attention, or do you think it's okay to have more horses and some can just live out their days as pasture buddies? I kicked the cows out of the pasture and quickly set up a fenced area right at the edge of the island. This is where they usually prefer to hang out anyway, so I think they were quite happy regardless. Day 88, I take Istra and Nike out to the new landing pad to test it out. I had also set up a hitching post with water should they need it. The baby dragon was having fun skittering around the bushes, so I left her to play while Nike and I tried the pad out. The takeoff was flawless, and she didn't protest when I cut the flight short to try landing. That was a little trickier. I had been practicing my speed flying and turning, but I hadn't done much controlled landing. I was pretty happy with how it went, but then had a momentary panic when I couldn't see Istra. In true mother fashion, I frantically searched the area before finding her hiding in a bush. She sat on my shoulder for the ride back, and later that day I cleaned all of the stalls, most of which were filled with poop thanks to having to bring the horses in from the rain. Day 89 was the usual horsey chores and checkups. Red and the filly were eating up a storm in their new paddock, and I was convinced there would be no grass left in just a few days. I almost forgot, you can comment name suggestions for Sakura's Foal in the comments below, and I'll pick the one that suits her most. Be as creative as you can. As I was walking back to the stables, I saw Istra spinning on a jar in my living room. I had locked her inside today because I needed to get on with chores and not worry about losing her like yesterday, and clearly she was in a chaotic mood because of it. Day 90, Serafina was out doing more flight training, and day 91 she even managed to take off from the landing pad. Day 92 to day 100, we lived out our days on the rescue island, all of the horses happy and healthy. Wow, what an adventure this was. If you made it this far in the video, comment down below which rescue horse was your favourite, and don't forget to check out pinehavenponies.co.uk. We have a massive sale on in celebration of the Year of the Horse, so you won't want to miss it. So I hope you guys enjoyed, stay positive, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!